Buenos días, bonjour, good afternoon, good evening to all. As Uruguay ambassador to Canada, I wish to acknowledge that I'm joining this meeting today from Ottawa. This capital city of Canada is located on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Algonquin Nation. The Algonquin Nation is a distinct indigenous nation of the Anishinaabeg peoples who have inhabited Turtle Island, also known as North America, since time immemorial, and who have been sustained by the watersheds of the Kichisibi, Ottawa, Gatineau, and Mattawa rivers of this region for generations. On behalf of the co-chairs of the WPS Focal Point Network, I welcome you all to this exciting event that we call Beyond 2020, towards a transformative women, peace, and security agenda. I invite you to have the screens on if you want, the Microsoft mute, and to use the different functions that we will be enabling during this meeting, especially the Q&A function. As you might have seen already, we have translation into Español, Francés, English, and American Sign Language. Quiero decirles que para mí es un honor moderar este evento. Je vous remercie pour votre confiance. And I would like to already apologize for this strong Spanish accent that you will be hearing this morning. But as somebody has said recently, a foreign accent is an act of bravery. As you have seen in the concept note, this meeting will have two main plenary sessions in an interactive format and using collaborative tools with the participation of an outstanding group of women, peace, and security specialists and experts who will focus on concrete actions to put the WPS agenda's vision of gender equal, inclusive peace and security into practice. In a third session, UN Women will be introducing a new innovation to assist WPS focal points in their work, a Women, Peace and Security Focal Point Network website that will provide global knowledge platform on women, peace and security. So now, without further delay, I would like to introduce the colleagues that will make the opening remarks of this event. So first of all, I would like to introduce our dear colleague and friend, Ambassador Wynne Coots, Director General for Peace and Stabilization Programs at Global Affairs Canada. Wynne, you have the floor.
Muchas gracias, Martín, y queremos tu acento platense. Welcome, everyone. Bienvenue, bienvenidos. It's my honor to join you today also as Canada's Women, Peace and Security Focal Point, and to represent Canada as co-chair with Uruguay, our dear friends from Uruguay, of the WPS Focal Points Network. I'm very happy to see some familiar faces here today and some new ones as well. So, working in this role with our Uruguayan partners these past 2 years through both 2020 and 2021 has been a great pleasure. And I think we've all learned, and we're still learning, a lot together through this very constructive and supportive partnership on women, peace, and security. And I'm sure that Canada and Uruguay will continue to look for ways to continue our partnership on WPS, including on exploring opportunities for working together to develop and to strengthen regional approaches. This cooperative habit is very difficult to break. From our very first event together in Montevideo in December of 2019, I think that we quickly learned that Uruguay and Canada were like-minded partners in our goal to achieve real progress in implementing the WPS agenda. And we agreed on the importance of encouraging very open and very honest discussions about both the challenges and the opportunities. One challenge that we didn't predict was we had planned to have these open and honest discussions in this network in person in Ottawa last May. But instead, COVID-19 happened and the whole world turned upside down. So like everyone else, we had to adapt and quickly pivot to a new way of meeting and working together. Virtual meetings have turned out in many ways to be supportive of our goals of being more inclusive of our civil society partners in network meetings. We were able to host more meetings on specific topics and to bring in more voices and perspectives. Instead of one annual meeting over 2 days, we had 5 online events in 2020 and already 2 in 2021. It's kept us very busy, but I think that we achieved our goal of doing justice to the 20th anniversary of the WPS agenda and to continue to build our WPS focal points community. Throughout this period, you participated actively, bringing your organization's perspectives to this work, and we thank you all for your commitment and continued engagement. In 2019, we were 72 member states, and now we're 90 and growing. Back in 2019, Canada and Uruguay started with the main idea that as the 2020 co-chairs, we wanted to encourage and to demonstrate leadership and concrete action to advance the women, peace, and security agenda in this 20th anniversary year and beyond. So this included listening to and working with civil society experts and partners to identify ways to improve support and protection for women peace builders, and translating this into action through impact-driven WPS action plans and strategies. Supporting the important work of women peace builders in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic was a crucial element of this. We also identified the need for a central knowledge hub on WPS tailored, which would be tailored to the needs of focal points to help answer the questions we all have on how best to implement the agenda and to talk to each other in between the in-person meetings. So today, 2 years later, we're excited to welcome the launch of a new WPS Focal Points website, which will be demonstrated to you later in the program today. We really hope that all focal points will embrace this opportunity to build our online community. The co-chairs also agreed that a main cross-cutting theme should be to explore and to demonstrate how the WPS agenda applies beyond armed conflict settings. We strongly believe that a more inclusive WPS agenda is essential to address the whole continuum of violence and insecurity in all countries and regions, including in so-called peaceful societies. We've convened our expert panel sessions today in support of the big idea that a more inclusive peace and security means more comprehensive, effective, and sustainable peace and security efforts. Now, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that I am joining this meeting today from my family's home in Sundre, Alberta, at the crossroads of the Treaty 6 and Treaty 7 lands, which are the traditional territories and meeting places of the Blackfoot Confederacy, including the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai nations, the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley nations, and the Tsuut'ina Nation. This land is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta. Through this acknowledgement, I reflect on what it means for me to be here today in this place, and to recognize the unique and enduring relationship between this land and its Indigenous peoples. Canada is not a country which is currently involved in an armed conflict. However, it is a nation where Indigenous peoples continue to face discrimination and violence, not only from individuals, but also through the systems and structures that were created based on our colonial origins, and which continue to shape our society today. Indigenous people in Canada are disproportionately represented in our correctional systems, unemployment rates, children in foster care, and overall poorer health outcomes and well-being. Indigenous women and girls in particular are targeted with violence and intersecting forms of discrimination. And there's no trust in our Indigenous communities that our justice system truly works for them. In June 2021, Canada launched a new national action plan to help address the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls in Canada. This important peace and security challenge is also reflected in our national action plan on WPS. However, it's a long journey and we're only at the beginning. We have a very long way to go in Canada towards reconciliation with our Indigenous peoples. Any progress we hope to make must begin with finding, speaking, and listening to the truth. In many fronts over the last 2 years, we've all been confronted with the truth that there are chronic issues in all of our societies that prevent us from ensuring the security and well-being of all of our citizens. In 2019, in particular, the truth about the prevalence of sexual harassment and assault of women in their places of work gave rise to an international Me Too movement. In 2020, the shocking deaths of Black citizens, including George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and so many others at the hands of police, resulted in a wave of global support for the Black Lives Matter protests in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. Indeed, in the wake of the pandemic, we've witnessed a rise in xenophobia all over the world, including targeted violence against people of Asian origin and Muslims. These past 2 years have been a time of great disruption, but also a window for change. I appreciate the opportunity to hear from our panelists today to help us explore these very difficult issues and to come away with ideas for how to take positive action to address them. If our nations wish to engage internationally on peace and security, we must do it with the humility that comes with acknowledging that we all have issues to address on peace and security at home, and that our governments need to take concrete action and to demonstrate leadership to address them. I do also want to mention that when we next meet as a network in September, hopefully on the margins of the UN General Assembly, Canada and Uruguay will be passing the torch to our partners, South Africa and Switzerland, as the new co-chairs for 2022. And we know that this network will be in very good hands. So I'll end my remarks here, as like all of you, I'm looking forward to hearing from our impressive group of speakers here today. With sincere thanks as well to our organizers for bringing us all together again today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wynne, for those very thoughtful remarks that go directly not only to our minds, but also to our hearts. I would like now to give the floor to my dear colleague and friend, mi querida colega y amiga, Noelia Martínez, focal point of Uruguay for Women, Peace and Security. Noelia, tenés la palabra.
Muchas gracias, Martín. Gwen, thank you. Buenos días a todos y a todas. La verdad que más allá de la natural coordinación que debe existir en cualquier ejercicio conjunto que implica una gran responsabilidad, como en este caso es nuestra copresidencia, luego de escuchar a Gwen, me reafirmo en la idea de que nos une una afinidad muy clara, tanto sobre la importancia del proceso, como sobre el fondo del trabajo que hacemos en esta red. Y hablar a continuación de Gwen hace mucho más fácil mi trabajo, porque muchísimas cosas de las que pensamos acaban de ser dichas de manera muy elocuente. Por este motivo seré muy breve y diré que compartimos plenamente la noción del importante rol que cumple esta red global como comunidad de práctica e interlocutor con la sociedad civil, así como el proceso de aprendizaje permanente con la sociedad civil y con los integrantes de esta red que significó que significaron estos 2 años de copresidencia para quienes participamos en ella. En el caso de Uruguay, si no fuera por el apoyo que hemos encontrado en esta instancia y en este marco de la red, hoy no estaríamos finalizando y aprobando nuestro primer plan de acción nacional. También compartimos esa visión integradora, inclusiva, que creemos debería tener la agenda de mujeres, paz y seguridad. Como bien señalaba Gwen, todos los países tenemos aspectos que podemos mejorar y esta agenda puede contribuir a ello. La dificultad que durante muchos años los países de nuestra región han tenido, y Uruguay también, para asimilar todo el espectro de acción y el potencial que la Agenda Mujeres, Paz y Seguridad tiene, a pesar de que no vivimos en situaciones formalmente catalogadas como de conflicto armado o posconflicto, pero donde la violencia basada en género o la desigualdad de derechos posee índices de los más elevados a nivel mundial. Es así que desde la preparación del Taller Regional para las Américas, que organizamos con Canadá en diciembre de 2019, que tuvo lugar en Montevideo, no hemos dejado de pensar y trabajar en este desafío de cómo aplicar la agenda de mujeres, paz y seguridad, más allá de situaciones de conflicto y posconflicto, abarcando así la construcción y sostenibilidad de sociedades pacíficas, justas e inclusivas, aprovechando la interseccionalidad y complementariedad entre las distintas agendas específicas, pero que tienen una finalidad común. Me complace también saber que quien hará uso de la palabra a continuación es alguien que ha trabajado muchísimo en las Américas sobre esta visión, como es María Noel Baeza, y sé también que estos temas serán abordados de manera sustantiva y desde distintos ángulos en el encuentro de hoy, por lo que espero con ansia las distintas presentaciones. Para finalizar, quiero aprovechar para reiterar el enorme placer que ha significado trabajar estrechamente con todo el equipo de Global Affairs Canada y de ONU Mujeres, por lo que comparto plenamente el augurio de Gwen de que una vez culminada esta copresidencia podamos continuar trabajando y aunando esfuerzos en favor de la agenda de mujeres, paz y seguridad, deseándole también una exitosa copresidencia a Suiza y Sudáfrica. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Noelia. Thank you very much. Before I turn to our dear colleague, Maria Noel, I would like to remind you that we have interpretation for English, Spanish, and French in the channel that you can see below in the screen that says interpretation. So if you haven't used it yet and you need it, please use it from now on. Okay? So now I would like to welcome María Noel Baeza, directora regional de ONU Mujeres para las Américas y el Caribe, a dear friend and a very proud compatriot of Uruguay. María Noel, please.
Merci beaucoup, mon ambassadeur. Good morning to everybody. Muy buenos días. It's a real pleasure for me to be here today. And because there is interpretation, I would like to speak in Spanish. Muy buenos días. Es un honor para ONU Mujeres y un privilegio ser la secretaría de la Red de Puntos Focales de Mujer, Paz y Seguridad, reiterando constantemente nuestro apoyo a este mecanismo tan importante que ha sido creado, y conjuntamente con el grupo de expertos en materia de género del Consejo de Seguridad y esta red, podemos decir muy claramente que gracias a estos mecanismos el tema de mujer, paz y seguridad es tratado en el Consejo de Seguridad con mucha más asiduidad y con mucho más relieve en estos tiempos. Y bueno, hace 20 años que tenemos, 21 años va a ser la resolución 1325, y celebro que nuestra región esté tomando este liderazgo como lo ha tomado mi país, Uruguay, que estoy sumamente honrada, no solamente del liderazgo que ha tomado conjuntamente con Canadá, que Canadá es un aliado natural del tema mujer, paz y seguridad. Por eso quiero felicitar a Gwen como punto focal de Canadá, como embajadora que ha llevado este tema a todos los foros, y también por haber creado el ELSI Fund, para verdaderamente poner sus palabras y poner recursos para llevar adelante la implementación de la 1325. Así que muchísimas gracias, Canadá, por vuestra generosidad. Muchísimas gracias a Uruguay por demostrar el ejemplo en nuestra región. Justamente después de este maravilloso acto voy a estar participando en la firma del nuevo plan de la 1325 de Perú, y estoy muy entusiasmada que la vicepresidenta de Colombia me ha dicho que ahora en su rol de canciller de Colombia también va a impulsar el plan de la 1325. Tenemos Uruguay, o sea, tenemos los países de América Latina que gracias al liderazgo de Uruguay están bueno, dando seguimiento mucho más cercano a este tema, y finalmente tener esos planes tan importantes. Bueno, también quisiera saludar a la co-chair, Noelia Franchi, felicitarla por su nuevo mandato en la Embajada de Uruguay en México y desearle todo el éxito. Y bueno, y a las futuras copresidentas de la red, Charlotte Love de Sudáfrica y Talia Wood de Suiza, aquí estamos como ONU Mujeres para apoyarlas y para continuar este maravilloso trayectoria para verdaderamente colocar a la mujer al centro de la agenda de paz y seguridad. El mundo post-COVID nos deja economías lánguidas, sociedades exhaustas, mucho mayores niveles de pobreza y exclusión y desigualdad, pero sobre todo nos deja que la crisis sanitaria ha dado lugar a una crisis social y económica y lamentablemente lo que estamos viendo en nuestra región, una alta crisis de gobernabilidad. Y en esto necesitamos asegurar que las mujeres se sienten en esas mesas de negociación y de diálogo, y esto también es la agenda paz y seguridad. Necesitamos una paz social, no necesitamos una guerra para que demostremos que hay inquietudes sociales que pueden derivar si no hay un diálogo y un diálogo paritario, un diálogo donde las mujeres sean escuchadas, podemos llegar a conflictos. Y quiero destacar el ejemplo de Chile, que comenzó un 8 de marzo del 2019 con una masiva participación de las mujeres muy pacíficamente, y luego, lamentablemente, en octubre, esa marcha pacífica, ese reclamo pacífico derivó en actos de violencia, pero hoy tenemos una asamblea constituyente paritaria liderada por una mujer indígena, una mujer maravillosa que cuando asumió demostró la importancia de ser escuchados en procesos de paz y la importancia de escuchar a las mujeres en sus necesidades y en su interseccionalidad. Así que estamos esperanzados, vemos que hay un gran avance en nuestra región para fortalecer los planes de acción a nivel nacional y haciendo uso de la metodología de alto impacto, que esto también es muy importante. También es importante que estos planes se integren a otros procesos nacionales que han sido priorizados para eliminar la violencia con motivo de género, como nos recordaba Noelia, para proteger el medio ambiente, para combatir el cambio climático y para dar respuesta humanitaria a emergencias y desastres. Así, los planes de acción nacional representan un instrumento de coordinación entre sectores que tradicionalmente no se coordinan y fortalecer la participación de las mujeres en esa toma de decisión y, ¿por qué no?, también decirlo, la necesidad de aumentar el número de mujeres en las tropas, en todas las fuerzas, militares y también en las fuerzas de seguridad nacional de la policía. Esto es un tema que no podemos olvidar, que todavía nuestra región tiene solamente 10% de mujeres en las fuerzas de seguridad. Y no podemos continuar así. Las mujeres interpretan a otras mujeres, tienen sororidad y pueden ser instrumentos demasiado valiosos para mantener esa paz ciudadana que se necesita. Es necesario combinar el esfuerzo nacional con el desarrollo de estrategias de localización elaboradas por organizaciones de mujeres de base, junto a autoridades nacionales. Las organizaciones de mujeres son las que entienden mejor la conflictividad local y las que entienden mejor cómo evitar esa conflictividad, cómo actuar de mediadoras y cómo verdaderamente resolver los conflictos. Por eso tenemos que apostar a las organizaciones de mujeres, para que ellas son construcciones de confianza que permiten fortalecer el tejido social en las comunidades y en definitiva llevar esto a nivel nacional. Pero necesitamos que se le dé espacio a estas mujeres líderes que tienen un rol de transformar los conflictos en sostenimientos de paz y en desarrollo. Les invitamos a profundizar y abordar de manera regional los desafíos que traspasan fronteras, fortaleciendo así alianzas y estrategias regionales y subregionales. Algunos de estos desafíos, como lo mencioné anteriormente, son el cambio climático, que son la base de los conflictos futuros, sus impactos ambientales, los desastres naturales, la movilidad humana. Y no nos olvidemos que en nuestra región hay 16 países que han acogido a casi 5 millones de venezolanos que han salido de sus hogares por razones políticas. Al conjugarse todos estos factores, es importante determinar ¿Dónde están los riesgos para así evitar que suban a esos conflictos? También estoy muy contenta y quiero celebrar la presencia de la Organización de Estados Americanos en este espacio y agradecer su voluntad de involucrarse al trabajo de Mujeres, Paz y Seguridad. Desde ONU Mujeres les invitamos a unirse en este proceso, en este esfuerzo con todos los países de la región y promover la agenda de Mujer, Paz y Seguridad en las Américas y el Caribe. Creemos que los instrumentos interamericanos son ideales para involucrar más mujeres en la construcción y la sostenibilidad de la paz. Por último, quisiera reiterar nuestro apoyo a la red de puntos focales de Mujeres, Paz y Seguridad, continuar involucrando más mujeres, más organizaciones de mujeres de base, impulsando el cambio transformador que requieren nuestras sociedades. Merci beaucoup. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias, señor embajador.
Muchas gracias a ti, María Noel. Thank you so much for your energy, always so contagious, and especially for setting the tone for a theme that will be a very strong link throughout this event, that is the spread and the depth of the WPS agenda. I don't know how it was translated into other languages, but I understood we don't need a word to engage in WPS, and this is what we are going to discuss at length today. I would like to, before we move on, to reiterate our appreciation for the American Sign Language interpreters, amazing interpreters that we have today, that we can take advantage in the main screen, as well as the other interpretations. So thank you very much for this. So now, for the next few minutes, we will have a warm-up session, an interactive icebreaker exercise that its intent is to bust some myths about women, peace, and security, some misconceptions that we have come across in our work, of course. So I will be posing to you four different questions, some of them very broad, and you will have the opportunity to react to them and to answer through this interactive tool called menti.com. So I will invite you to use the browser of your choice and type menti, MENTI.com, and we will provide to you a code to access our specific function. The code is 73674677. You can see the code number in the chat function. I hope you got it. 73674677, menti.com. All right. So the first question, it will be, women, peace, and security is a Western agenda led by member states from the global north. And there will be three options to answer: agree, disagree, not sure. Of course, we can assume what will be the correct answer, but think about also how this question will be understood in your community or in your country, not from the expert point of view. So yes, no doubt here. Disagree. That's the correct answer. Of course, WPS is not a Western agenda. Women leaders from civil society and member states from across the global south were key actors in advocating for the creation of the WPS agenda through United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325. Women from the global south were very active agents in WPS movement and continue to play an essential key role in the implementation of the WPS agenda. This is the easy answer, the clear answer at this level, but as we are going to see throughout the event, including in the next session, in plenary session 1, this discussion between global north and global south in the WPS agenda has many layers, including when we talk about the production of knowledge for the WPS agenda. So I invite you to keep this in mind for the next panel. So we're going to the second question now. Which country initiated resolution 1325? And we have 4 options: Namibia, Canada, Bangladesh, and United Kingdom. I give you a few seconds to answer. Okay. All right, I think this is great. This proves that you are all experts on WPS. You passed the test. Of course, the president of the Security Council and the initiator of the resolution is Namibia. The resolution was initiated by Namibia and unanimously adopted by all Security Council members. So the member state that were in the Security Council at that moment that supported the resolution and voted in favor, beside Namibia, of course, is Bangladesh, Jamaica, Canada, the UAE, Argentina, Malaysia, Mali, the Netherlands, Tunisia, Ukraine, and of course, the 5 permanent members of the Security Council. I would like to recall, before we move to the third one, keep the third question is okay, but there is a connection. There is a connection with this question. In a previous event, when we commemorated the 20th anniversary of the 1325 resolution, we had as one of the main speakers, the Prime Minister of Namibia. We had the honor to listen to her wisdom, and this happened in the high-level Troika high-level side event that we co-organized with Namibia and with the future co-presidents, South Africa and Switzerland, in October last year for the 20th anniversary of 1325. So the third question, this is also a very broad question. The Women, Peace and Security agenda is important, but you can only implement it when the conflict or the crisis is over. Pretty obvious for all of us, but definitely a myth. So strong responses and engagement. Thank you very much. The WPS agenda should not be an afterthought when resolving conflict. If the objective is to stop the fighting, then women play a critical role in achieving this. Women must be engaged in all levels of peace processes. And this question, again, is very important for the discussion that we are going to have throughout this day, as we are going to talk about the different interactions and linkages with other human rights agenda that affect women's rights and women's safety and security. So the last question for this interactive ice-breaking exercise: how can countries implement the WPS agenda if they have fewer financial resources? And there are a few options. A, listening to civil society organizations and women peace builder perspectives. B, advocating for WPS internationally and domestically. C, highlighting the advocacy work of women peace builders. D, ensuring women's participation in one's own work. Or E, all of the above. Yes, Absolutely, there is no wrong answer here. We like all of the above, of course, because we can all do that. But even if we in our field we do one of them, we will be helping to promote this agenda and to help this cause. So all of these are very valid activities and action that we can support in our own fields and organizations. So thank you very much for participating in this activity. I think it's a great way to start with a lot of energy our first plenary session, and this session that has the name of the event, toward a transformative WPS agenda. We'll have panelists that will explore what it means to have a transformative women, peace and security agenda. We will raise questions like, is our current approach to WPS inclusive and comprehensive? How can WPS agenda help address the root causes and full spectrum of violence and conflict? What are some of the linkages to other agendas that can help advance the WPS agenda? How can this agenda, and specifically WPS action plans, help to identify and address systemic racism and discrimination? Our three outstanding speakers will share some ongoing challenges on these issues, as well as practical ideas for how government and civil society and citizens can work together to achieve a more transformative WPS agenda. So for this first panel, we will have three speakers. We will hear from Katrina Leclerc. Katrina is a Francophone young woman from Western Canada, currently pursuing her PhD in conflict studies at St. Paul University, with a focus on the synergies between the women, peace and security and youth peace and security agendas. With extensive expertise in peace building in conflict affected areas, Katrina has been coordinating also the global network of women peace builders program, WPS YPS program in Eastern Africa since 2016. After Katrina, we will hear Dr. Tony Hastrup. Dr. Tony Hastrup is Senior Lecturer in International Politics at the University of Stirling, in the United Kingdom, a feminist researcher and teacher. Her work seeks to understand prevailing global power hierarchies that inform cooperation and conflict within the international system. Her work has explored the politics of knowledge making in the context of the women, peace and security, global South perspective on feminist foreign policy, and gender and racialized nature of and responses to contemporary crises. And the third speaker will be Hilary Anderson from the OAS, Senior Gender Specialist of the Inter-American Commission of Women at the Organization of American States. Since Hilary finished her studies in gender and development at McGill University in Montreal, she has been working with the Pan American Health Organization, PAHO, Gender and Health Unit, and with the United Nations International Research and Training Institute for the Advancement of Women. In 2009, Hilary joined the staff of the Inter-American Commission of Women, SIM, at the OAS, where she works as a senior specialist on key women's rights and gender equality issues in the region. So this is our outstanding panel. I'm very excited to listen to them. So without further delay, I will call Katrina. Madame Katrina Leclerc, laissez-moi vous demander en question. Okay. So this is a very broad question for Katrina. What do you think a transformative WPS agenda means? Madame, vous avez la parole.
Muchas gracias, embajador. Estoy feliz de estar aquí esta mañana. Gracias también por la invitación. I would like to begin by recognizing and thanking the Wabanaki and Abenaki peoples on whose lands I'm calling from today. The question of a transformative WPS agenda is so important and, as you've said, incredibly broad. So today I'd like to focus on three primary aspects of a transformative agenda. The first is the conceptualization of peace and security, including our understanding of violence. Lorsque nous visualisons l'agenda Femmes, Paix et Sécurité, pour plusieurs, nous voyons des femmes dans les opérations de maintien de la paix, des femmes dans les négociations de paix ou des femmes dans des instances de relèvement post-conflit. Mais nous donnons rarement la priorité aux initiatives et approches femmes-paix sécurité qui poussent l'agenda au-delà de la sécurité militarisée traditionnelle ou des processus de paix formels. J'aurais tort d'oublier de mentionner le concept de violence structurelle esquissé par le théoricien Johann Galtung en 1969. Galtung introduced the concept of structural violence and defined the terms of negative and positive peace. He defined negative peace as the absence of personal violence and positive peace as the absence of structural violence. He largely equated the latter with social justice, and he claimed that the concept was ever-changing and sought to positively define conditions for peace. This conceptualization of positive peace is the fundamental argument that for the need for inwards-looking WPS policies in non-war affected contexts, for example. This demonstrates the need for the Women, Peace and Security agenda to go beyond traditional security approaches and to address structural violence as a key threat to peace, following the principles as well of the continuum of violence outlined by Resolution 2467 that we adopted in 2019. This brings me to my second point on integrating and prioritizing intersectionality. Intersectionality was first coined by Professor Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989 within the context of critical race theory. In practice, intersectionality is a specific analytical lens understanding that power intersects with facets of our identities. It goes beyond race, gender, age, class, ability or disability, sexual orientation, or other identity determinants. It requires us to understand, or at least seek to understand, how all of these identities affect our daily interactions, our lives, and the experiences that we do live. In the context of the Women, Peace and Security agenda, intersectional feminist analysis requires us to consider and target these various layers of our identity, which are inevitable barriers for many. Les femmes ne sont pas uniquement des femmes. Dans mon cas, je suis à la fois jeune et à la fois femme, et je ne peux pas me séparer de ceux-ci dans mon identité. En tant que jeune femme, je fais face à les barrières basées à ces deux aspects de mon identité, et dans plusieurs instances, ceux-ci ont un effet même cumulatif. Nuancer les politiques, comprendre les politiques générales ne fonctionne pas et en laisse plusieurs pour compte. C'est un bon premier pas vers la priorisation de l'intersectionnalité, alors que nous transformons l'agenda Femmes, Paix et Sécurité. Les organisations de la société civile sont particulièrement essentielles pour comprendre et proposer des solutions et pour faire progresser l'agenda à cet égard. The third aspect of the Transformative WPS agenda is partnerships. This is one of the pillars of the Youth, Peace and Security agenda, which I strongly believe we should be borrowing and is integral to our new, progressive, and transformational WPS approaches. Peace and security frameworks should focus on collaboration between thematic areas, including women, young people, children, or others, to be truly transformational. Les partenariats signifient être collaboratifs et non compétitifs. Personne ne gagne lorsque nous travaillons en silo. Nous souffrons tous de limiter la collaboration et de favoriser la concurrence. L'un des moyens de renforcer les partenariats avec la société civile. Par exemple, le concept du groupe consultatif Femmes, Paix et Sécurité établi par le deuxième plan d'action national du Canada est une étape positive vers le co-leadership de l'agenda. Le travail des réseaux et des coalitions avec le soutien financier des États membres garantit des partenariats plus solides. Et en terminant, to be transformational, those of us who champion women, peace, and security must push beyond the traditional limits. We must prioritize positive peace, actively challenge structural violence, ensure intersectional feminist analysis, and focus on partnership building. Implementing women, peace, and security should not be solely about adding more women in decision-making and conflict resolution. It must go beyond the parameters of the current governance systems and institutions. Women peace builders are already transformational themselves. It is far time that the world follows in their footsteps. Thank you, merci, gracias y miigwech.
Merci beaucoup, Catherine. Merci pour votre excellente présentation. I really like to hear this combination of working on the intersectionalities, the collaboration, and partnership building. This is what we are all agreeing in as a transformational agenda. Thank you very much. Now, I would like to invite Dr. Toni Hastrup to take the floor. I will pose a question to her as well to elaborate on her thoughts on this topic. So, Toni, to you now. What does an anti-racist and decolonial approach to women, peace, and security agenda look like? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me here this afternoon here, morning over there, and to our other colleagues who it's evening for. It's a real pleasure to be here. So a decolonial approach to WPS seeks to challenge coloniality that is manifested in three modes. So coloniality of power, coloniality of knowledge, and coloniality of being. For our purposes, I will focus on the first two. So when we talk about the coloniality of power, we're talking about how colonial worldviews persist and have carried on into this post-colonial era, and often manifesting in hierarchical relationships, sometimes exploitative, sometimes dominating between the global north and the south. This is important for our purposes because this sort of relationship, this dynamic between the north and the south, tends to be replicated in global institutions, in the structure of the state, and indeed, unfortunately, in some of the practices of global normative frameworks. But these global power hierarchies are then reproduced and reinforced by a coloniality of knowledge. Coloniality of knowledge speaks to how colonial societies have systematically banished indigenous forms of knowledge from their archives, and together have rejected different mediums through which that knowledge is communicated. And indeed, when we're thinking about the coloniality of knowledge, we're forced to ask some questions like, what knowledge is being used when we think about, for example, philosophies of humanitarian intervention, whose knowledge is integrated into thinking about models of best practices, of how we investigate and how we do research, who determines the scope of inquiry, and to what extent is indigenous knowledge actually being integrated into the practices in our context of WPS, now that we know, I think by and large, that those knowledges are excluded. At the heart of these exclusions, of course, is systemic racism. This is how these sorts of hierarchies are maintained when we think about the basis for why the global north is the global north and the south is the south. On this basis, then, an anti-racist approach to WPS must seek to challenge coloniality and how it manifests in the context of the WPS agenda. The WPS agenda, too, can be illustrative of a practice of global politics that is rooted in exploitative patterns of interaction between the global north and global south. The dynamic of this relationship ultimately inhibits the emancipatory potential of the WPS agenda, particularly that has been advocated by feminists, by activists, and grassroots civil society organizations. And I think it is urgent to sort of unpack what I would consider to be the embeddedness of these racial hierarchies that tend to exist in our everyday so much so that we don't notice it in the obvious. Where global north countries dominate or dictate the practices of the women, peace, and security agenda, in countries that are considered to be poorer, often located in the global south, they tend to enforce or reinforce what I would consider to be an otherness, which is problematic and unwarranted because, as we see, these countries have also been instrumental to the development of this global normative framework. Often, these interventions, particularly in parts of the global north, happens where certain types of women are deemed to be in requirement of WPS intervention, which invariably then tends to ignore the local agency of local WPS advocates. Of course, we speak of this local women peace builders, women human rights advocates, but I ask us to go a bit further. To what extent are we engaging with those who are minoritized even within this minority framework? Are we sticking to urban centers where elite sentiments may accord with those of us who are located in other privileged spaces where it might be palatable? Or are we going deeper to consider, for example, the perspectives of those women who are based in rural areas? Wealthier countries have often positioned themselves as being better placed to respond to some of the challenges that we've identified over the last 20 years. But often in their attitudes and policies, they do reflect those racialized legacies of colonialism, which means that they then don't consider, for example, what are the conditions that engender these vulnerabilities that WPS is created to challenge. So I will use my country as an example because I think it's really important to be self-reflective and be open. In the United Kingdom, we've been champions and advocates of preventing sexual violence in conflict and very much engendering and really campaigning for women's participation. But at the same time, our government has just announced 4 billion in cuts, despite the fact that we've already made international commitments, we've made linkages with different partners all across the global South. Invariably, this will affect the important work that is being done by grassroots organizations in these locations. We also often invoke, as I said earlier, our own experiences. But again, using the example of this country, while we advocate for dealing with sexual violence externally, here, non-nationals have no recourse to public funds. So you can imagine what implications this has for immigrant women wanting to flee, for example, abusive relationships, and the extent to which they can access government-funded shelters. And so a transformative WPS must consider how racism is imbued in the practices of global policymaking, both at home and abroad. To formulate then a decolonial anti-racist WPS, we must ask the big questions. What are the conditions of international politics that create the gendered vulnerabilities that WPS is designed to deal with? And of course, when we ask this sort of question, we know that that question is not just about what happens in those locales of insecurity, but actually globally. How can we center knowledge that is not hegemonic, bringing in the knowledge from minoritized others? That knowledge already exists. So this is about spotlighting that knowledge. How can Global South practices inform what we know about the WPS and in a much more visible way? Moreover, and finally, I think representation when it's superficial is quite problematic. But I think that we're at a period now where it's really important for us to look at the architectures for action and ask who is represented. Thank you very much.
I thank you, Tony, for this very deep and at least for me, but I'm sure for most of us, a mind-opener reflection on the complexity of the relationship between the global North and the global South on this issue. The colonialism mindset that still is around, and the underlying racism that feeds this dynamic. These are very powerful reflections that I really appreciate that you share us with us today, and the importance of being self-aware and self-critic about the situation. So now I would like to turn to Hillary, and I was really looking forward to ask this question to her. You will see why very soon. So Hillary, beyond armed conflict settings, how does the WPS agenda apply to the continuum of violence, insecurity, and conflict? How the WPS agenda, triple nexus agenda, that includes humanitarian development and peace building actions? Thank you very much, Hillary. The floor is yours.
Muchísimas gracias, embajador. Buenos días, buenas tardes, good morning, good afternoon, bonjour to all of my colleagues who are joining us and following us today. It's a pleasure to be here. So sexual and gender-based violence in the Americas exists at the center of three issues that really don't intersect as often as they should. On the one hand, public or citizen security, violence against women, and then women, peace, and security. So the conceptual separation of these three issue areas has in practice led to the political, technical, and also administrative separation as well, to the extent that national security, public security, and violence against women are addressed by different government entities that rarely dialogue amongst themselves. and not to mention the multiplicity of other issues and sectors that also now come into play when we talk about peace and security issues. In addition, the sectors that address peace and security issues interact a lot less frequently with civil society than the sectors that primarily address violence against women. The national machineries for the advancement of women, the ministries of women, or their equivalent, they rarely have a peace and security focused agenda. With that result, and the result of that in the Americas specifically, is that the WPS agenda has largely been addressed up until now by civil society. It's extremely encouraging over the last few years to see that a number of states are actually taking on board the WPS agenda from different approaches and in different ways. But there is finally a political recognition of the importance of the WPS agenda that has been largely absent in this region up until now. Similarly, at the OAS, these issues are also addressed by different departments. And the Inter-American Commission has not yet been able to place the WPS agenda on the agenda of the OAS itself. I promise it's not for lack of trying, but we're really happy to be a part of spaces like this because it gives us, it highlights the importance of the WPS agenda and why it needs to be a political agenda as well as a civil society agenda. And WPS as a triple nexus agenda means that the public security agenda needs to adequately address the full continuum of violence against women. Domestic interfamily violence to violence against women in legislatures and other political institutions to the violence against women that's perpetrated by agents of the state during times of conflict or instability or insecurity. It also means that the national security agenda needs to more effectively encompass the current reality of the Americas, and I think increasingly the rest of the world, which includes less traditional armed conflict and more short and longer term crises. And these include the deterioration of democracy, electoral instability, the insecurity caused by transnational organized crime, natural disasters, food and water insecurity, migration or human mobility, including the migration caused by climate change and environmental degradation, which we're going to see a lot more of over the next decades, instability and violence in the context of social activism and mobilization, and the defense of human rights and the environment, among a multiplicity of other processes. And then finally, the violence against women agenda also needs to more effectively address the multiple forms of violence, including trafficking and sexual violence used as an instrument of repression and control that women are increasingly confronting in all of these varied contexts of change and instability, and that we've seen quite a lot of in the Americas, unfortunately, over the last few years. So the WPS agenda is an important entry point, for changing our approach, both to peace and security and to violence against women. It already provides the conceptual framework, the mandates, and the tools that we need. And with a very consistent and central focus on the importance of women's leadership and women's experiences and women's voices, it also helps to show us the way forward. From our perspective at the OAS and for the region of the Americas, what we need particularly in this moment, and I think it's applicable to the rest of the world in the forthcoming decades, because the nature of conflict and crises is changing, is to sort of repackage the WPS agenda beyond the context of traditional armed conflict. So as an initial thought exercise, I think this reframing.
Hillary,
yeah.
Hillary, so sorry to interrupt you, but we are hearing a background noise from Clattery. I don't know if you are hearing that too.
Hold on 1 second. Let me see if that's better.
And another special request from the interpreter, if you can slow down a little bit, that would be great.
Sure.
Sorry for the interruption, Hillary.
That's all right. No, that's all right. So as I was saying, I think what we need in the Americas at this moment is to sort of repackage the WPS agenda and beyond the context of traditional armed conflict. And as an initial thought exercise, this reframing is going to require more focus on the one hand, some of the longer term instability and contextual insecurities that I mentioned earlier, particularly things like the insecurity created by climate change and environmental degradation. Also, the issues like security sector reform for the base of human rights, democratic oversight, transparency and accountability, women's participation in security and peace building, from an intersectional perspective, as many of my colleagues have already pointed out, and taking into account the histories and the current lived realities of Indigenous, Afro-descendant, young, and other communities of women. And then finally, women's leadership in security policy making. As I think it was Maria Noel pointed out, women are still a significant minority in security forces, but overall in leadership and decision making related to peace and security issues. And that's an oversight that that we need to correct, and that we need to accelerate efforts to correct as well, because if we leave it to sort of naturally correct itself, we could be here for another 200 or so years. So this is a debate that we hope to spur at the OAS over the coming months as we continue and intensify our efforts to place the WPS agenda on the agenda of the organization and its member states. And I do hope that all of you will join us in spurring that debate and in contributing to enriching it. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Hilary. Your presentation. I listened to you and I saw a lot of alignment with what Maria Noel said at the opening. There are clear entry points, especially in the Americas on the WPS agenda related to security institution, the participation in peacekeeping, in peace building, but the depth and the spread of the agenda in the reality of regions that may not be affected strongly by armed conflict is still a challenge. And we have people like you at the OAS working hard on this, and we all need to be aware that we need to step up our game in our region, and probably this applies to other regions as well, to include all these intersectionalities in the framework of the WPS agenda as well. So thank you very much. Stay around because we will have some questions for you, follow-up question for you as well, using the Menti function. So we became apparently very good with this interactive tool that is menti.com. So the system wants us to continue using it for a few more minutes before we go to the next session. So now I'm going to invite you again to go to your browser and type menti.com. You will be using a different code this time that I guess, right? That's going to be shared in the chat function. 21806070. 21806070. That's the new code. You can see it in the chat. All right. So hopefully you will be as engaged as in the opening section. I have 3 Menti questions for you that will be then, according to your answer, commented by our 3 speakers. So for the first theme, for theme number 1, that was addressed by Catherine. The question is, are we ready? Okay, what actions can member states, civil society, and other stakeholders take to ensure the WPS agenda is transformative? So please, you can type a few words. 3 words, yeah, a few words to type your answer. I give you a few more seconds to go through the answers, especially to Katrina. A lot of good stuff here, a lot of substantive answers. Thank you very much for being so so active and engaging, reference to disarmament, to the national action plan with high impact. So thank you very much for this. We're going to the second theme, a second question. So question number 2, what are some actions government, civil society, and other stakeholders can take to ensure women, peace, and security policy and programming is decolonial and anti-racist? So please, again, if you can type short answers so our speakers can read all of them and make an assessment of what are your thoughts on this. Thank you very much. Don't be shy. This is anonymous, of course. I will read one that is in Spanish. Incorporar las minorías. Ah, it went up. Sorry. GBA plus analysis. Good. Take into account indigenous knowledge and experience. Cambios socioculturales. Campañas de desensibilización. Thank you for being so active. Talk about key issues, which are hard. Don't be defensive. I love the be humble one above, by the way. Participatory approaches. WPS agenda to be inclusive. I hope, Tony, you are taking note. I don't want to distract you. All right, listen. Oh yeah, I love that one. So the third and last question, what are some international and regional agendas that could benefit from stronger links to the WPS agenda? Again, if you can be concise in the answers, we'll appreciate. Thank you. Awareness campaigns. Youth, peace and security, disarmament, ligar los asuntos económicos a la construcción de la paz, o economic development and peace building, strong connection there. Very, very important in concept in Latin America. Climate change, the triple nexus, UN Declaration on Rights of Indigenous People, global warming, international rights of the child, silencing the guns. Good. SDGs, of course. Regionals and regional programs. Interesting, we have so much to learn from the African Union, here SADC as well. Socioeconomic rights again. Okay, I'm so happy to see the engagement of all of you. You are making this this event, even though we cannot see each other in person, very interactive, and this is the type of engagement that we were dreaming of. So thank you very much. I hope Hillary is also taking note. Yes, good. All right, I think we have very good material for a quick 5-minute reaction from the panelists, from the speakers, about these 3 questions that gather the thoughts and the priorities of our dear participant, the civil society representative, the focal points from the different countries. So I would like to follow the same order, so I give more time to the last questions, and with that I would like to invite Katrina, if you want to share some thoughts about the reaction from the audience to this question.
Yes, thank you so much, Ambassador. Merci beaucoup. Well, first of all, I think many members of our audience understand quite well where we're going with this transformative WPS agenda and where we're trying to get to. And it's no surprise that many of our excellent civil society partners and others are in this audience and are those already driving the agenda forward in many ways. And I wanted to highlight a few recommendations that we did see in the Menti, but that I also came up with based on the questions that were shared and the idea of being transformational. So first is about funding. The big question about funding is always so important. So about funding grassroots local women and young women's organizations and networks, but including specifically core funding. To be transformational, we need to build the capacity of the local feminist movements. And so they need core funding to do this. It can't always be tagged along with program-oriented funding. It needs to be about capacity building for their movement and organizing. And this is key to developing and sustaining a strong feminist movement beyond the programs that these many selfless organizations do run. Something else is about eliminating the barriers by offering funding and capacity building for the funding, for example, for proposal writing, monitoring and evaluation, and reporting. These are often additional barriers that feminist movements, women and young women's organizations face in trying to access funding in the first place. And so I think that is so important to making sure that the agenda is transformational. And to Dr. Hester's point, it's about going beyond those who we see in the regular table, those who have this access already, being able to give this capacity building and funding this capacity building for local women and young women's organizations. Another aspect of the transformative agenda, which is often questioned, is the meaningful inclusion question. What does this mean? What does meaningful mean? What does inclusion mean? And so to me, or my understanding of this is it's a request for co-development. It's going beyond simply consulting for the fact of consulting. We want consultations, or civil society wants consultations, but if we're only consulting after the fact, is it really worth consulting at all? And so that's the question to bear in mind. And at the same time, we never want to say that we don't want any consultations. That's of course not the correct answer. But co-developing rather than just simple consultation, I think is key to making sure that the agenda is transformative and to push us forward in how we interpret the agenda. Another aspect is to ask civil society what they need. And we saw this in the Menti as well. We ask civil society what they want, what they need, go beyond those in our capitals, those who live in those centralized urban areas in many contexts. And also civil society can facilitate this in many areas. If we fund those coordination efforts, civil society is a key partner in this. And it's not always the responsibility of the member state or the governance structure to have to do this coordination if there's a meaningful partnership with civil society networks. And then lastly, actively reach out to these networks and coalitions working in peace and security with the intent of having this meaningful engagement, partnerships, and also trying to, as my point earlier, bridge these gaps between these different thematic areas of the agendas. And then lastly, just before I cease to speak, I think it's important for us to remember that it's okay not to have all the answers. We've talked about humility, we've talked about being humble. I think working together and co-driving women, peace, and security with civil society organizations and networks, doing the everyday work, demonstrates humility and shows a genuine understanding of intergenerational, intersectional feminist leadership. And so remembering that it's okay to acknowledge that we don't have all of the answers and to seek to find them together is how we can be transformational in our women, peace, and security approaches.
Thank you very much, Katrina. I'm a big fan of humility, and I have heard the Wynn's opening remark. Tony Hasbrook references, now you and the audience highlighting that, and I think will be definitely a theme and a thread of this event, and I'm very happy to see that. So now to you, Tony, did you were surprised of some of the actions suggested by the audience or reaffirm your convictions? What can you share with us?
No, not at all. I was not surprised at all. I think, it's not usual that you don't have much to add, because I think a lot of people already know what some of the big issues are. I think what does come through, though, in a lot of the themes that are highlighted, and I will talk about some specifically in a moment, is that a lot of this stuff takes time. And the architecture of global policy making doesn't necessarily allow for that. We want measurements and we want programming that has to happen in a 2-year period of time. But if what we're invested in is really transformation, we want to change things from a system that has existed for centuries, we cannot expect that would be fulfilled by programming in 2 years, in 3 years. I know that this is probably not the audience that wants to hear that, but I think that that's really important. For my part, right, I think a sort of a decolonial feminist lens and framework, in a way, can help us draw a roadmap to what it is that we're wanting to do. So to take some of the comments that have been highlighted here: disarm, demilitarize, reallocate military spending. Absolutely, I would agree with that. I think that it's not consistent to sort of claim that we want to do something around a women, peace, and security agenda, where again, a lot of the resolutions, a lot of regional programs, they do have that aspiration and that intent in them, but we need resources to actually deal with those things, right? And to take from what was said earlier, this is why we need to fund civil society, not just because we need to give money to civil society, but we need at the very least the same amount of resources that has gone to maintaining these hierarchies that I talked about earlier, to then facilitating change. And in as much as we keep sort of, money has to go somewhere, money has to come from something. And what we know is that with a lot of those countries that are in a position to do something about it, what they've done is to increase their military spending. Aside from increasing their military spending, the investment in militarization. So how can you be truly committed to a transformative women, peace, and security agenda when you're investing in the conditions that make the implementation of WPS necessary? Those two things are contradictory. And this is why I say again that, we need sort of, collaboration across both the sort of domestic and international, because often I think it's quite easy for countries to say things like, well, we can't all of a sudden stop subsidizing our military establishments, our gun-making industries, but don't worry, we'll keep giving money to WPS. It cannot work. It doesn't work like that. But the thing is, it will take a lot of time, and that's what we need, time to actually make changes to these things that have been considered relatively normal. The other part that I wanted to address, and I think, I spoke about it earlier and it's come out here as well, is where we've seen practices that have really engaged collaboration and participation, there is a tendency to keep going back to the same old people. And that's not to suggest that there isn't something to gain from existing partners. It's not to suggest that those people are not specialists in their areas. But if we want transformation that is inclusive, that wants to bring everyone together, then we should do the work of expanding our networks. We should do the works of, going beyond cities. And, this is something that I reflect on constantly in my own work. Am I just doing the same things over and over again? If that's the commitment to that inclusion, then we have to be willing to put in the work. You know, I once heard the feminist scholar Cynthia Enloe say, this work is not easy. And you know how I know it's not easy? By engaging with those people who are in the grassroots, who are actually doing this work. That it's not easy, that, you know, you don't just come up with a national action plan in a month. Of course, you could if it was simply being written by bureaucrats, but to get a really inclusive one, then you have to engage with all the communities that will be impacted by this. And frankly, when we talk about those communities, it's everyone. I think that perhaps finally, the last dimension that I think it is worth considering is, if we are invested in anti-racism, and I've been talking about, you know, the ways in which the systems as they currently exist do facilitate racism. And you know, here I'm not saying, you know, there is one person who works in a particular organization that is racist, but actually that the architectures of the institutions are built in very specific ways, in ways that they perhaps exclude those people who are minoritized or marginalized much more so than they include, that we need to then sort of speak and engage with those minoritized individuals and engage with their lived experiences, but also engage with those people who have expertise in those areas. I think Katrine said earlier that, you know, it is okay to admit that we don't know everything, but that's why you engage your communities. Here in the UK, I often say it's really important to engage the diaspora communities. If you want to do something in Afghanistan because of the women, to what extent is the government actually engaging with people who've come here from Afghanistan, who've actually experienced that particular space? And that's not to suggest that none of this has been done at all. I mean, there's really good example of work that has been done. But all this to say, more of this must be done. Thank you.
Look, Tony, you overwhelm me with these comments, but I will tell you this in a good way. No? This is the place to speak your mind. And we need to listen to that. This is the audience that needs to listen to these kind of messages, because we decided that this is a safe space to interact with the government, with civil society, and allow ourselves to think again, to rethink our conceptions. And you are doing just that. You are making us rethink many things. So I'm very glad that you raised this point, that for many years, I worked at our permanent mission to the UN for many years, some time ago. The discussion between the funding of peacekeeping connected to peace building or peacemaking, political missions has been endless. And these are the discussions that, if we want to be coherent as member states as well, we have to put all these questions, because the contradictions are very clear and are happening even in our national level with the national security institutions as well. There is a strong connection. Thank you very much for being so blunt and have the confidence to tell us all of these thoughts. Now I would like to give the floor to Hilary, and also I am very curious to see, Hilary, if some of these answers about the interlinkages with the agendas. I saw a lot of connection to what you said, of course, but is there something that you probably see that you didn't think about, or any comment at all on this reaction from the audience?
I mean, I saw a lot of things that I didn't address during my very brief remarks, and we'll certainly take all of those really useful comments back. I think it's important to highlight that, particularly in the Americas, the women's movement has always had a women, peace, and security agenda since before Resolution 1325 was adopted 21 years ago. No, and that agenda has never really made it to policy and decision-making spaces in this region. So organizations like the OAS and national governments need to be a lot more intentioned about creating spaces to hear from the women's movement in all of its diversity on what their priorities are for peace and security agendas and for the WPS agenda. And we've seen a lot of that, I think, in different ways over the last few years in the Americas, as countries have moved away from military dictatorships, from periods of more formal armed conflict, but the promise of democracy and prosperity that followed those sort of reconstruction periods hasn't been fulfilled. And there's an awful lot of frustration from different sectors around those unfulfilled promises. And you know, those are being expressed through a number of different social mobilizations. And the response of most of the states to those mobilizations has been that they have a security problem. So we'll send out the armed forces, we'll give more money to the military, we'll give more money to the police, we'll invest more money in weapons because we have to control all of this unrest, all of this instability, because it's worrying us. But it's not a security problem. This is it's, as one of the people who commented said, it's a poverty problem. You know, there's an economic argument underlying all of the mobilization. It's a gender inequality problem. The Ni Una Menos movement over the last few years, women are tired of being killed by their intimate partners, by security forces. You know, it's a corruption problem. It's a transparency problem. It's a lack of representativeness problem. People are tired of the fact that democracy doesn't seem to work because it isn't effectively representing their interests. But this is not a security problem, even though it's being handled like one. And I think to that end, the importance of kind of breaking down some of the silos that we've been working in over the last few decades within the international organizations and regional organizations, also within national governments, is kind of the way forward. And I think that does require, as one participant highlighted, it requires humility. It requires that we let go of some of our territoriality over different issues. It requires that we acknowledge that we can't address peace and security issues without addressing violence against women, that we can't address violence against women without addressing access to justice, that et cetera, et cetera. And we are bound, as Tony mentioned, by sort of the 3-year project cycle or the 4-year electoral cycle. And it is very difficult to take a long-term view of these issues when you know that after the next election, all the priorities can change, or as you know, a regional organization has a different secretary general, or et cetera, or donors change their priorities from one cycle to the next. It is difficult to implement anything that's going to have a lot of long-term impact. So I think one of the priorities from our perspective is certainly to try to break down some of those silos and some of that territoriality that exists between organizations within national governments, and to engage in a lot more with civil society in terms of what their vision of a WPS agenda is and how we should respond to it. I'll leave it there because I don't think I can address the multiplicity of issues that were raised by all of the people that commented through the Menti, but I'm certainly going to take it all back with me. Thanks.
No, thank you very much, Hilary. And this is a constant battle, breaking the silos. It never ends. And this self-awareness that we have to keep doing that all the time is the way to go. What I was thinking when you were talking and seeing the answer is that beside the work in our silo, we need leadership, especially in those events, in those processes that are broader than just WPS. And at least in the Americas, that is the region I belong and I know more, opportunities like the summits of the Americas that are broad, that try to get leadership decisions and vision for the future. These have to be harnessed. I'm sure Win is internally maybe nodding to this comment, but the next time we have to take advantage of this and put the agenda on as a priority if we want to send a signal that we have to break those silos and integrate this agenda at least in the regional organizations. But the same goes, of course, to the UN and international organizations as well. So thank you very much. I think the interaction with all the participants made this session much richer and interesting than we thought. Thank you all very much for your engagement. Now we put an strategic pause to the event, I think, especially for the moderator to stop speaking a lot, and we will have a very good thing to show you. This is a video. This is the first video of a series that's called Let's Talk Women, Peace and Security, that our team of the co-presidency and UN Women has been working. So for the next few minutes before we resume with the second plenary, we will be watching this first series that aims to be informative, inspiring, and accessible to present new ideas and different perspectives on the scope and purpose of the WPS agenda, including how it connects to and complements other agendas that inform and support the international gender, peace, and security architecture. So I invite you to watch this. I have seen it. It's an excellent video. You will recognize the presenter right away. So enjoy it and see you in a few minutes.
In 2005, I had an experience that changed the way I think. I was in Khartoum, Sudan, working 3 days a week at the new UN peacekeeping mission and 3 days a week on the busy campus of Afad, Sudan's only all-women university. North and South Sudan had just signed a peace agreement and had tried to put an end to more than 30 years of brutal war. There was a new transitional government that was planning to write a constitution, to reform the armed forces and the entire civil service, and to keep spreading the word across the country about the content of that peace agreement. It was an exciting and deeply hopeful time. And yet women from all parts of Sudan were struggling to shape their own futures. They were largely excluded from the formal peace talks. And in this next phase, they still struggled to get to the table where more major decisions were being made. And it was so clear to me that they had this strength and the perspectives and the connections and the wisdom that were so badly needed for an agreement to take root, to take really deep roots that would give the deal a real chance to succeed and to endure in the uncertain times ahead. And it was so striking to see up close how remarkable women from all parts of the country had to spend their time and their energy and their brain power just to get their voices heard, to get invited to consultations or to serve on parliamentary committees, to be appointed to commissions, to shape donor priorities, and so much more. Sudanese and South Sudanese women forever shaped my understanding about who belongs at peace tables and about the roles that we all play in removing the barriers that diverse women face to getting there. I've been fortunate to keep learning from them in the years since and from women around the world with similar experiences. And I'm more committed than ever to help make change, including in my role now as Canada's ambassador for women, peace, and security. Au cœur même du concept femme, paix et sécurité se trouve enracinée l'idée que tout le monde a le droit d'influencer les décisions qui ont un impact sur leur vie. Et ça inclut vivre en paix et en sécurité. Il reconnaît que les meilleures pratiques et les politiques sont celles qui sont élaborées par des personnes les plus touchées. Le raisonnement femme, paix et sécurité existe parce que même si les femmes dans toute notre diversité jouent un rôle essentiel dans la prévention, et la reconstruction des guerres. On est toujours dramatiquement pour The concept of women, peace, and security is not about saying that all women are inherently more peaceful than men. It is not about just adding a few women to an existing process and thinking that they will somehow represent all women or be able to transform the institutions or norms or structures that have been in place for generations. And above all, it is not an idea that comes from the so-called West or the global North. We have Resolution 1325 and so much of what follows because women community leaders from around the world, particularly those whose lives were directly impacted by the horrors of war, advocated. Thousands came together in Beijing in 1995 for a World Conference on Women. Women from Colombia, from Rwanda, from Bosnia, the Philippines, and so many other places. And they talked about how even though they came from very different contexts, their experiences were strikingly similar. It was that during the war, they sustained their communities. They got warring parties to go to peace talks. They fought as combatants, and they led healing and reconciliation. And yet, when it came time for formal processes to deal with these issues, they were largely excluded. So they mobilized and ultimately convinced the UN Security Council to state that women are not only victims of war, but they're essential agents of change. Even Resolution 1325 itself was led by Namibia, with support from Bangladesh, Jamaica, Canada, and others. Une donnée probante qui vient vraiment me chercher est le fait que la résolution 1325 a été traduite dans plus de langues et de dialectes. Résolution du Conseil de sécurité des Nations Unies. Partout autour du monde et parmi leur communauté, les femmes savent ce mouvement et savent. I find it stunning when someone tries to dismiss the ideas driving women, peace, and security as being imposed by the outside. And I found that people who most often say that it's not culturally appropriate for women to have a voice in their own lives are those that are most determined to preserve their own power and who have the least interest in being held accountable by their own community. Women everywhere have a right to participate in decisions that affect their lives. And we know that when they do, peace is more likely to endure. La participation des groupes de la société civile, y compris les organisations des femmes, au processus de paix est plus de 63% des accords de paix. Lorsque les femmes jouent un rôle significatif dans les processus de paix, la probabilité que la paix dure au moins 15 ans augmente. La mise en œuvre de l'agenda Femmes, Paix et Sécurité est essentielle. Une paix durable n'est pas possible si la moitié de la population en est. We now have several Security Council resolutions on women, peace, and security. Almost 100 countries have created national action plans to bring the ideas alive in their own context. We have big multilateral organizations with plans. We have hundreds of local communities with strategies. And we are also evolving as a field. Many recognize the idea of intersectionality, a term coined by Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw, to describe the ways that various forms of inequality can operate together and exacerbate each other. Young people have made clear the crucial importance of the roles they play, as have people who don't fit in traditional gender binaries. We are changing, and we are changing the world. And when I think about my hopes for the next 20 years, I want us to succeed in shifting the burden, meaning that women, in all of our diversity, no longer feel that we need to make the case as to why we belong at every decision-making table. I want governments and institutions and communities to have to justify how they can still exclude, how they have not yet removed barriers to equal participation. That's where the burden should lie. None of us have the time to waste. Thank you. Merci.
Okay, welcome back. That was great, right? Thank you very much, Jacqueline, for your outstanding performance. I think you will be nominated for the next Emmy at least. Okay, so thank you very much for watching this. I hope you like it. We have more in the pipeline, the making. We expect to have a couple of more videos on the construction of national action plans, the regional approaches, and women peace builders. So we really hope we can make it in the next weeks to be shared with you at the platform, the new platform of the website that will be introduced later in this event. So with that, I would like to introduce you to the second session or plenary session. And I would like to say that there are multiple factors that contribute to insecurity, including weak governance institutions, high level of inequality, deeply polarized societies, and an overall lack of trust between society and the state. And these factors become amplified in crisis, of course. Women are trusted leaders, peace builders and mediators in their communities, countries, and regions, working to address violence and conflict prevention, conflict resolution, and recovery, including in political leadership, defending human rights, environmental protection, and emergency and disaster response. That's why this second interactive plenary session is called Building Trust, Building Peace, which will highlight the personal experiences and diverse perspective of women peace builders who work as trusted actors and leaders in their communities, countries, and regions on violence and conflict prevention, resolution, and recovery. For this session, you will be able, I'm referring now to the audience, to all the participants, to pose questions in the Q&A function. And I invite you to do as soon as you feel that you have a question. These questions will be collected by our great team from Global Affairs Canada, led by Annick Lucier-Res, and will be presented to the speakers after they finish the rounds of questions that will put to them to generate this interactive dialogue. So with that introduction, I would like to present our amazing group of panelists for this second plenary session. I would like to start with Madam Elizabeth Solomon, a peace mediator, member of Women Mediators across the Commonwealth, Industrial Court Judge, and Director of the Mediation Board of Trinidad and Tobago. Elizabeth Solomon is an experienced mediator in a wide variety of political, post-conflict, and commercial contexts around the world. She's a director of the Mediation Board of Trinidad and Tobago, former executive director of the Dispute Resolution Center and the Caribbean Center for Human Rights, and then founder of Dialogue Solutions. Elizabeth had a full career in journalism before joining the United Nations, spending the next 20 years as a conflict prevention and peace-building practitioner in various conflict contexts, including in the role of Deputy Coordinator of the UN Good Offices team in Cyprus. I would like then to introduce you to Diane Redsky. Diane Redsky is Executive Director of the Maui Wichita Center in Manitoba, Canada. As a national renowned visionary thinker and community leader, she has long worked to address the myriad of issues facing Winnipeg's urban Indigenous community in all areas, including health, justice, education, and social services. Since 1993, Diane has served in both a professional and volunteer capacity within the social services sector and has become a strong advocate for Aboriginal children and women's issues. She has helped create numerous innovative programs that have supported the building of healthy communities. Diane has been instrumental in the development of resources for sexually exploited and trafficked girls, including a safe house and a rural healing lodge in Canada. In 2013 and 2014, she led the Canadian Women's Foundation National Task Force on Sex Trafficking on Women and Girls in Canada, which made several recommendations to end sex trafficking in Canada. She has returned to the Mama Maui Wichita Center in Winnipeg to bring leadership and a voice on Indigenous issues. And the last two speakers have been patiently waiting from the Philippines at night. I will be introducing right away. First, Diane, Helen Rojas. Helen is currently the Chief of Staff of member of the Bangsamoro Parliament and concurrent chairperson of the Bangsamoro Women Commission, Hadja Bainon Caron. Before joining MP Caron, Mrs. Rojas was head of the National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security Secretariat of the Office of the Presidential Advisor on the Peace Process from 2015 to 2019. In 2009, she was part of the preparatory committee which drafted Philippine National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security, the first action plan in Asia. And last but not least, Aniya Fatma Guinar, Niña Guinar, who is a member of Young Women Leaders for Peace, a program of the Global Network of Women Peace Builders from Marawi, Philippines. Along with her fellow Young Women Leaders for Peace, she mobilized 4,000 young youth belonging to different religions from more than 60 schools in over 30 provinces in the Philippines through peace fora on gender equality, women's rights, human rights, and sustainable peace. In response to the COVID-19 pandemic, she quickly mobilized to distribute relief food, face masks, hygiene products, school supplies. She also raised awareness of the gender impacts of the pandemic by discussing the increase in sexual and gender-based violence, including child, early and forced marriage, and teenage pregnancies in her communities. She has also led social media campaigns to counter fake news, misinformation, and disinformation about the pandemic and share critical, life-saving information to prevent the spread of the virus. Thank you for the service that you all provide to our communities. And now I would like to start with Elizabeth with two questions that I will put in sequence. So I would like to begin, Elizabeth, with the following. Can you share practical examples of how local, national, and regional mediator networks, including Indigenous women networks, are trusted actors and a critical element of building and sustaining peace and security? Thank you very much. You have 5 minutes, but overall 10 minutes to answer two questions, so you have that flexibility to use it as you want.
Thank you, Martin, and thank you for this opportunity to share my perspectives on transformative peace building. I think this is a very important discussion, and it's happening at a critical time of immense global change. We're experiencing what I think is a perfect storm of social upheaval. It's a confluence of hastening climate change, the various crises related to the COVID-19 pandemic, extremely traumatic ruptures of historical, unreasoned perceptions of identity, clashing with a demand for a reckoning and a validation of every identity within the complicated spectrum of humanity. And of course, the irreversible technological connectivity of all things. At the political level, we appear to be remaining boxed in and somewhat defensive around largely binary definitions of how socioeconomic systems ought to respond to these changes. Democratic versus conservative versus socialist versus authoritarian structures. But on the ground, massive social shifts are happening. Conflicts, old and new, are brewing, but so is the potential for a more inclusive and longer lasting approach to conflict transformation. To quote one of my favorite sisters from the South, Arundhati Roy, either way, change is coming. It could be bloody or it could be beautiful. It all depends on us. So for us on the Women, Peace and Security agenda, and for us in the Americas, this perfect storm, I think, has particular significance. And Hillary will be interested in this if she doesn't already know, and that is as far back as 2015, I was part of an expert working group that was searching for common approaches to deal with what we called unconventional conflicts and violence in the Americas. And it was organized by the OAS and funded by Canada, actually. We looked at an array of countries in the region: Jamaica, El Salvador, Mexico, Venezuela, Honduras, Guatemala, Belize, and even some cities in the United States like Los Angeles. And what we were looking at was the levels of violence as conflict. Globally, the number of homicides far exceed the number of war-related deaths. I think we know this. And more than half of all homicides occur in this region, although the Americas represents just 10% of the world's population. I think that's really significant. And we've made mention of it before, but I think we need to hone in on some of these facts so that even before this perfect storm, our populations have been suffering from armed violence of an unconventional kind. They're existing in a state of non-peace that is rooted in social problems that profoundly impact on our sustainable development prospects. Inequality and marginalization, lack of opportunity, and ideological differences trigger unconventional conflict and violence, just as they do war. Yet violence is still considered a national problem and not a regional factor. And responses tend to be heavy-handed, legislative, and militaristic. And those strategies are clearly not working. So my point is, peace-building approaches are needed urgently. The impact of the pandemic threatens to deepen conflict throughout this region. The state of non-peace that we're experiencing could become even more strained. What began as a health crisis quickly became an economic and social crisis. Fundamentally, this is a crisis of governance superimposed upon the regional reality of low and declining confidence in governments and in politics. A recent UNDP study revealed that the proportion of population in countries in the region who believe that their country is governed in the interest of just a few powerful groups is growing. In 2018, it averaged at 79%. That speaks to low levels of trust. So inclusive dialogue is critically needed to regain trust. These trends of violence and insecurity within the borders of many countries in the region are perpetuated by the movement of trafficked drugs, women and children, weapons throughout the region. The socioeconomic situation in Venezuela has deepened tensions in many countries of the region as refugees struggle to find a safe haven. Xenophobia in my country, Trinidad and Tobago, is at crisis levels. This is a regional issue. The hurricane season is upon us again, and climate change has increased the intensity and unpredictability of the storms, bringing with it increased vulnerability for some countries and the prospect of movement of waves of climate change refugees to other countries. And this was mentioned earlier. These challenges are interlinked, but rarely approached from a regional perspective. The political engagement at the regional level in general remains somewhat elitist. It's an elitist exercise without the benefit of inclusive dialogues. And furthermore, there is no regional peace architecture. So Martine, perhaps this is an issue for the Summit of the Americas, it's an issue for the OAS, but there is a need for a regional approach to peace dialogue. So opportunities for women peace networks in this perfect storm. Women experience conflicts and social upheavals differently from men. Women are the mothers of the perpetrators and the protectors of the families. Women console the victims and they bury the dead. Women are the nurturers of future generations, but women can be destroyers also and will enter the arena for their cause. The point is that women traverse a range of identities, which is probably what makes us such good mediators. And those identities have to find their ways into peace processes. So the women, peace and security agenda has to be geared towards more than increasing the numbers and visibility of women. A transformative agenda must mean engaging much more deeply so that all their experiences are fully reflected and integrated into the design and implementation of peace processes and preventative peace measures. The women mediators across the Commonwealth, as an example, has conducted a number of member-led research projects on enablers of peace and have participated in cross-regional dialogue around challenges to peace in different contexts. Women mediators networks have created platforms for strengthening advocacy around more inclusive processes, but also for deepening the understanding of effective strategies at all levels of peace building. And I'll leave it there for that question at the moment.
Thank you, Elizabeth. There is so many things that we can follow up after this presentation, and I hope the participants are going to put some questions in the Q&A function that we open for this session. I have a follow-up question, more concrete, but I would like to thank you for raising very clearly this even a conceptual challenge of seeing this situation in a different way, because as you said, whether we like it or not, social shift is happening. It's very clear. We see it all around, and you don't need to be living in a society that is impoverished or have difficulties because of the pandemic. It's happening to all of our countries. And you mentioned something about the level of violence as conflict. And I remember many years ago, I participated in a training exercise with Uppsala University. And I remember that they count 25 deaths in a year as a conflict situation. 25, right? And this is much bigger what is happening. So I could go on a lot with you, but let me put you this more concrete question. Second question is, what actions can government, civil society, and other stakeholders take to support women mediators and mediator networks toward more inclusive and successful peace processes? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. You know, I'm glad you mentioned the Uppsala statistics, because there's also a definition of a violence epidemic that the WHO uses, and we far exceed that in this region. So there's a lot of information out there that defends our position that what we're experiencing is warranting of peace-building initiatives. So I would want to suggest 3 tasks for transformation. The first one is to engage inclusivity as an imperative. Just do it. Enough talk. I mean, I hear what Tony is saying about it takes a long time, but we have been talking about inclusive processes, and we just have to do it. I mean, every voice is valid, and more than that, if all voices are not included, frankly, the process is not valid. It's as simple as that. So we must just make it an imperative that inclusion is an aspect of all processes, full inclusion. We have to do that work. Being connected digitally makes inclusion much, much more doable than ever before, but it also makes inclusion somewhat noisier. So we must remain focused on our peace-building craft to use technology for the purposes of peace. Secondly, I think that we should dust off the human rights-based approach and use it as a framework for implementing change. It creates a checklist of who should be the focus of how we engage. Non-discrimination is a core principle of human rights. Identifying and empowering the most vulnerable builds equity and lifts up our fellow human beings to equality. And the human rights approach is an aspiration of peace that is grounded in a common standard of treatment of each other. From that perspective, I see the human rights approach as a valid tool for this transformation. And thirdly, be empowered by the strength of diversity. I think we have to, and this was mentioned earlier also, I was happy to hear, that we need to encourage identity-driven dialogues, because within the Commonwealth, within the Americas, within all regions, we are not the same, but we are better and we are more durable communities because of each other. And just to make a few more points, apart from those 3 key transformational tasks, I think the discussion around national action plans is very important. And whatever you call them, I think that those plans are not embraced by all countries in the region, and they should be fully inclusive national dialogues that are aimed at redesigning the social compact, that challenge the private sector to articulate a meaningful purpose for what they do, that gives voice to the aspirations of everyone and takes that into account. The objective is to remove, in a sense, the plausible deniability that underpins the business as usual approach, and to invigorate the imperative to be inclusive. Women mediators face, as we have said before, intersectional challenges in their work as peace builders or as peace protectors. And governments and regional organizations can actively clear the path so that they can walk more easily along this road. Specifically, I think they need to recognize their work and understand the value of their work. We need to nurture young women mediators through training and opportunity. There is a tendency to train, to say that women need to have capacity building. We are very experienced. We need opportunities also, and we need to nurture the younger generation. We need to promote the work that women do nationally, regionally, and internationally. We need to record and research their work and make them exemplars. We need to protect women mediators and peace builders. And we at the Commonwealth Mediators Network have done some studies on some of the challenges and what are the specific areas of protection that women mediators need. And finally, we also have to create the space for us to rest and recuperate so that we may pick up and go again. I think I'll leave it there for now, Martin.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth, for sharing those very practical and very concrete ideas on improving our work on this matter. So I'm sure there are some questions that are going to be raised to you by the audience. I would like to turn into Diane Red Sky. So Diane, I have a couple of broad questions to you for you to address in 10 minutes in total. I will begin with this one. Why is it important for Indigenous women in particular to lead on conflict and violence prevention, response and recovery? Diane, thank you very much.
Thank you, and good morning. Bonjour, I just introduced myself with my spirit name, translated to English is Love Eagle from the Caribou Clan. My English name is Diane Red Sky, and I'd like to begin with acknowledging the traditional territory of Treaty 1 and homeland of the Métis Nation, which I have the privilege of living and working on in Canada, also known to many Indigenous people as Turtle Island. I also acknowledge the traditional territory of my ancestors of Treaty 3 and Shoal Lake First Nation 40 that provides the city of Winnipeg with water, yet still has a water boil advisory for its own members. And I also acknowledge the ancestors that all of you have brought here today that join you and walk with you on your journey. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. This is a really important question. Women leading on conflict and violence prevention, response and recovery is all about restoring balance in our societies. The evidence is clear. When you change a woman's life, you immediately change her family, her community, and then her nation. So how do we get there? This will require significant transformative change of all systems, and Canada is no different. The recent national inquiry into the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls and Two-Spirit LGBTQIA in Canada concluded that violence experienced by Indigenous women and girls amounts to genocide. So what are Indigenous women in Canada doing about this? Indigenous women and girls are reclaiming power in place to make this transformative change in order to move from surviving to thriving. Indigenous women are leading, but you must have the political will to change. There needs to be a national action plan, and there is one for the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, but also with significant funding to support activities. I am hopeful that all countries also have a Women, Peace and Security National Action Plan like Canada does. And within this plan, hold a very special place for Indigenous women. So why is having a national action plan important? It will be very difficult to achieve restoring balance without it. Having a clear plan that has adequate funding is essential to ensure women are supported to reclaim their power in place, particularly with Indigenous women who have specific teachings on peace building. We have very strong values on maintaining balance And it is the women who hold this responsibility in our communities. The story of the Haudenosaunee Women's Nomination Belt in Canada holds the teachings regarding the restoration of the role of women. This basket depicts on the belt includes inherent human rights, laws, responsibilities, names, titles, clans, and anything else you can think of in creation. It is up to women to protect that basket and be leaders, arbitrators in disputes, and protectors of the land. The responsibilities of matriarchs are contained within this basket. Where I come from the Ojibwe Nation in Treaty 3 territory, we organize our people within communities based on the clan system. This clan system is governed by women who assign each child to a specific clan at birth. Much like what needs to happen here, what is achieved is that communities are organized. So everyone is very clear on their role and responsibility to the health, well-being, and peace in the community. We can no longer take for granted that things will happen. We have to make it happen. And there is so much that all countries can learn from Indigenous women in your efforts. I will end with my favorite Rosemary Brown quote: "None of us have made it until all of us have made it." May good.
Thank you very much, Diane, for answering this question in such a clear and concrete way. And I'm glad that you raised the National Action Plan issue, because it was mentioned by Elizabeth, and I wanted to comment, but I want to move quickly because of time constraint. But you reaffirmed this tool that is so important, and I wanted to share with you that the last meeting of the network that they happened basically among focal points was specifically about national action plans, to see how different realities, even if you're not a developed country like Canada with resources, you can use an app as a tool to engage, not only as an end in itself, but as a process for inclusive discussion, to have around the table people that otherwise maybe wouldn't talk to each other, as has been even in our case of Uruguay. So thank you for raising that point very clearly. And I will follow up right now with a second question, Diane. So what are some concrete actions that we, and you already mentioned apps, of course, government, civil society actors, individuals can take to support Indigenous women leadership? Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I'm going to go right to, just making sure my videos, yeah. I'm going to go right to leading with and provide an example of Indigenous women. And so Indigenous women from two very different countries coming together to make significant transformative change in each of our country that happens to be rooted in shared traditional Indigenous knowledge. Indigenous women, regardless of where you are in the world, have a deep connection to each other. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me why we encourage and support non-Indigenous colonial systems and people who enforce those systems into our communities to teach us only how to enforce those rules that don't work for us anyways. I call this jump in and jump out, and it's only a temporary solution to the root cause of systemic racism. The real solutions are in the hearts, minds, and spirits of Indigenous women in our communities, regardless of where we live. My example begins with one of the many ways to hurt, disempower, and harm Indigenous women is to take their children away. Indigenous women in Canada and our Maori sisters in New Zealand know this all too well. It is common practice in Indigenous communities for the extended families and community to share in the decision-making for the care and protection of our children. Family Group Conference is an Indigenous-led approach that helps and supports families involved with child welfare to become the decision makers instead of the colonial system that oftentimes are set up to ensure Indigenous families fail. Family Group Conference disrupts the child welfare system and places the power and decision-making with Indigenous families. Why is this important? Because the results prove what we have known this whole time. Indigenous women coming together is inherently powerful. And in the 3 years before the global pandemic, we had the following impacts with Family Group Conference: less days in care for children, less trauma resulting from families being separated, 98% of the children were returned to their families, over $9 million cost savings to the child welfare system annually. And for every dollar invested into Family Group Conference, there is a $3.69 return on investment. So Family Group Conference saves money and lives and wraps around families when they need it the most. Family Group Conference works as an antidote to many of the vulnerabilities that colonial systems have created and continue to perpetuate. By supporting the rebuilding of the family relationships and structure, the model works to create Indigenous ways of knowing and Indigenous sources of strength and safety. So what can governments, civil society actors, and individuals do? Encourage, make investments, provide funding, and support Indigenous women around the world to come together to share our experiences, implementing Indigenous knowledge and wise practice into mainstream systems. And that is the best way to be moving forward. And that is the best investment that everybody can make to achieve peace and security within our countries.
Thank you so much, Diane. That was amazing. It's not just the right thing to do, but it makes total sense. Even economically, you are putting all the arguments there. So very clear answer. Really, really appreciate that. Thank you very much. So now we're moving to our patient speakers from the Philippines that have been waiting throughout the night for their turn. So I'm very happy to now introduce Helen Rojas, and I will post one question to each, to Helen and to Nina, and then a general question to both of you. So it will be 3 questions in total. I will start with you, Helen. So my first question, guiding question, would be, how can women, peace and security, regional, considering subnational and local action plans, help address regional peace and security issues, considering, of course, your example in the Philippines, your work there. So thank you very much, and you have the floor, Helen.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you very much, Ambassador Martin Vidal. And I'd like to greet everyone a good morning, especially the WPS focal points, fellow panelists and audience. I would like to answer that question by sharing Philippines Women, Peace and Security implementation experience. The Philippine National Action Plan is being implemented through interagency coordination. We have a steering committee on women, peace and security. At the national level, the steering committee is chaired by the Office of the Presidential Advisor on the Peace Process. And in the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region, the steering committee is chaired by the Bangsamoro Women Commission. The committee is composed of different government agencies, including major agencies. The Philippine National Action Plan was formulated through collaborative efforts of all the members of the steering committee with the participation of civil society. The steering committees, both at the national and local level, include the formal security sector. So we have the Armed Forces of the Philippines and the Philippine National Police, which reaffirmed their significant role in protecting the safety and security of women and girls during emergencies. The first cycle of the Philippine National Action Plan formulation process included series of regional consultations to ensure that local peace and security issues are captured and addressed by the plan. The Philippine NAP, which is currently on its second cycle, calls for a multi-level implementation of the plan. We term this as regionalization. This strategy led to the development of the Bangsamoro Regional Action Plan, or RAP-WPS. Now, the formulation process of the regional action plan was also collaborative and coordinative, involving ministries, offices, agencies, local government units, civil society, academe, traditional leaders, and Muslim religious leaders. Series of ground and community conversations with women in conflict-affected and conflict-vulnerable areas were also conducted, capturing the narratives of women, which informed the development of the Regional Action Plan. Now, to ensure that the plans, both the National Action Plan and the Regional Action Plans, are implemented, the same are integrated in the Gender and Development or GAD plans of the respective ministries, offices, and local government units. At the national level, there is a joint memorandum circular enjoining national government offices operating in conflict-affected and conflict-vulnerable areas to integrate in their respective GAD plans and GAD accomplishment reports the Women, Peace, and Security agenda. At the local level, the Bangsamoro government issued omnibus guidelines on the gender development planning and budgeting, which include a provision on integrating the Women, Peace, and Security agenda in the GAD plans and GAD accomplishment reports of ministries and local government units. Implementing a gender development plan is mandated by a law, and this is the Magna Carta of Women, which is the translation of the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women in the Philippines. And this is further enforced by the General Appropriations Act. Both laws, the Magna Carta of Women and the General Appropriations Act, provide that at least 5% of the total annual budget of each office and local government unit shall be programmed for gender and development. Now, in the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region, the Bangsamoro Organic Law, which is the law creating the Bangsamoro Autonomous Region in Muslim Mindanao, also provides for the same 5% appropriation for gender and development. To ensure that commitments of ministries, offices, and local governments on the Women, Peace, and Security agenda are implemented and sustained, regular monitoring and evaluation of implementation of the national and regional action plans are conducted. Ministries, offices, and local governments are directed to submit quarterly accomplishment reports on their GAD plan implementation. At the local level, annual and mid-year assessment of both gender and development and regional action plans are conducted. This good practice that we have in the Philippines can be replicated at the regional level. In terms of ensuring whether regional peace and security issues are addressed, regular reporting and updating process and mechanism should be put in place and institutionalized to keep track of emerging issues and evolving contexts affecting regional peace and security. Now, in terms of further ensuring that commitments of member states are implemented and sustained, regular funding for the Women, Peace, and Security agenda should be set aside through a policy such as the Philippines' 5% gender and development budget. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Helen. And let me commend you personally and to your country for the leadership that you have taken in Asia in developing the National Action Plan, but also for showing the way of how to make this interaction very smooth between the regional approach, the national and sub-national and local. This is a great example, I think, from the Philippines that can be shared to the rest of us and learn a lot from them, especially considering the very distinctive geographical circumstances of your country. With that, I would like to turn now to Ania Guinar and pose a guiding question to you, Ania. So, how has the regional action plan for the BARM region integrated an intergenerational approach to ensure that young women and girls are not left behind? So, thank you very much, Nia. The floor is yours.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you so much, Ambassador. And to everyone who's with us today, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. For too long, young women in the Philippines have been overlooked. Our critical contributions to building peace and preventing violent extremism have been sadly undervalued. The specific impact of armed conflict on our lives is often forgotten too. But for the past few years in this field as a youth and peace advocate, it is good to see the improvements, the small yet powerful changes that have been made along the way. With the launching of the Bangsamoro Regional Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security, or what we call RAP-WPS, last year, it marked a significant milestone for both the women and also the youth for a more inclusive and gender sensitive mechanism in peace building and conflict transformation. It is a tremendous step towards achieving sustainable peace and gender equity in our region, which has been heavily impacted by armed conflict, violent extremism, clan warfare, or what we call RIDO, and natural disasters. The Regional Action Plan calls for an investment in women's rights and sustainable, inclusive peace building in partnership with women's civil society and gender equity allies across the region. And in line with that, with the gender sensitive provisions of the peace agreement with the Philippine government and the Moro Islamic Liberation Front, the Regional Action Plan commits to increase women's meaningful participation in the transition to the BARM and mainstream WPS commitments into the Bangsamoro Development Plan. Grassroots women peace builders are expected to lead and to be included in local peace and order councils in conflict-affected communities. So now the Bangsamoro Women Commission, or BWC, headed by MP Hadja Bainon Caron, has been conducting strategic planning workshops, lecture trainings on local conflict mediation, and also webinars in time of pandemic to raise awareness about the role of women in sustaining peace in the community in the context of BARM and to capacitate, empower them through these local events and projects. Another important organization is the Bangsamoro Youth Commission, or BYC. One of their programs last year also was the Lingkod Kabataang Bangsamoro, where they have partnered with proactive and accredited youth organizations to distribute relief packages to vulnerable youth groups directly affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. BYC also held the Bangsamoro Young Women Conference, which consolidated the needs of the children of overseas Filipino workers, or OFWs. Also, capacity development and mandatory trainings have been provided to Sangguniang Kabataan. That's the youth council in each barangay community here in the Philippines to hasten active citizenship and good governance. For the past months, a lot of relief operations and donation drives were conducted, and it's really heartwarming to see that the packages distributed did not only contain the usual food packages. Rather, we saw hygiene kits and sanitary kits for the menstruating women, stuff for lactating mothers, other health kits. So this is one step forward on our recognition on the impacts of horizontal conflicts to the women, youth, and other vulnerable sector in our community. And as for our organization, the Young Women Plus Leaders for Peace of Philippines, we are ready to partner with BWC and BYC to ensure effective implementation of the Regional Action Plan and the Peace Agreement. As you can see, these important groups, along with other government agencies, non-government organizations, civil societies, and other allies are working hand in hand to deliver the provisions included in the Regional Action Plan, including gender-sensitive humanitarian emergency response. And not only that, we can see projects that are not limited to a certain age bracket. And with that, women of all ages are in co-leadership in our journey to long-lasting peace. That would be all. Thank you.
Ania, thank you very much. And let me commend you for your work on the ground. You are in the forefront. You are an inspiration for all of us. So it's so refreshing to listen to these concrete activities you are promoting with your colleagues in the Philippines. So thank you for sharing that. Don't go away, because I have a follow-up question for both of you, and I would like to kindly ask you to keep being very very concise as you have been, very concrete, so we can finish in time, but you are doing great. So just continue to do what you have been doing. So the question for both of you is, can each of you share some examples of how regional governments, in this case, the subnational, no? An organization can improve their support and protection of women peace builders, for example, through regional action plan. So, Helen, do you think you can jump in now?
Yeah, thank you very much, Ambassador. To ensure the protection of women and women peace builders, it is a good strategy to have a convergence of efforts under a regional action plan. So through this, government agencies, civil society, and non-government organizations can commit appropriate interventions that complement and do not overlap. Let me further share one good practice that we have in the Bangsamoro region. To operationalize the commitment of ministries, offices, and local government units, as well as non-government organizations and civil society under UNSCR 1325, ministries, offices, and women organizations implement their respective agency-specific or organization-specific action plans on women, peace, and security, while local governments implement their provincial or municipal action plans, or PAPs and MAPs. These plans are aligned with the 4 pillars of the regional action plan, which are: first, we have protection and prevention; second, empowerment and participation; third, promotion and mainstreaming; and then fourth, we have monitoring and evaluation. Further, the implementation strategy of the regional action plan involve women in conflict affected areas and displacement and their communities, for them to also feel a sense of ownership of the plan. In our experience, these women we engage, including mothers, wives, daughters, and sisters of combatants, have been at the forefront in ensuring that women and women peace builders are protected, because they themselves have become strong advocates of peace. It is also important that government and other organizations, especially donor organizations, should establish and maintain a regular forum where both can share information and provide updates on their respective programs and interventions that they implement. Through this regular forum, we keep track of what have been done and identify what needs to be done further to improve support for the protection of women and women peace builders. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Helen, for that very concrete to the point answer. Anilla, your turn, please.
The RAP WPS certainly has the potential to support and protect women and young peace builders, as it commits to capacitate local actors by providing awareness raising trainings on WPS and gender responsive budgeting in communities. This is vital to cultivate ownership and support for effective implementation of the WPS resolutions among key stakeholders, including BARM agencies, its local governments, traditional and religious structures, with due consideration to varying rigidity of gender norms across the region. For example, the RAP requires the orientation of traditional local mechanisms such as the sultanates and Council of Elders on WPS and women's rights. A lack of understanding of the gendered impacts of armed conflict will perpetuate structural gender inequalities and women's exclusion from political decision making. But its effective implementation will only be possible through localization. So the updated Gender and Development Code, or the GAD, was officially adopted in late 2020 with a corresponding budget, and now responds to the gendered impacts of armed conflict and the priorities of women peace builders. To truly bridge commitments, priorities, and resources into efforts to build peace and promote gender equity in communities affected by conflict, the regional action plan must be localized and owned by the related key stakeholders. from the perspective of the youth, visibility of regional governments and organizations on the ground taking action and active communication are factors in helping to improve the support and protection of our women peace builders. It should be taken into consideration the bigger role of women in decision making and in solving complex issues at the grassroots level. Their presence should not be only about being witnesses or being an audience, but it should be about their active participation, meaning they are part in the design and implementation of post-conflict resolution and peace-building activities. In addition to that, safe spaces and avenues in their respective communities must be ensured to facilitate a deeper understanding of their sentiments and concerns, to really have that connection that the government is on their side, the government is there to listen to them. Also, we need to amplify the voices of our indigenous people in our very own communities. Provision of adequate and sustained financial security and technical support must also be given to these women's organizations to further strengthen and solidify their peace building efforts. And with the emergence of our women peace builders, their lives and also their families are put at risk just because they are promoting justice and peace, threatening those in the opposition. So it is just important that the local government and other civil society and organizations must be able to be there to protect them. And by protect, that doesn't mean locking them out of the conversation and in the peace table. But perhaps the most important contribution of the regional action plan to protecting and supporting women peace builders is the recognition of the need for their meaningful participation in decision making at all levels in peace, security, and humanitarian action. So inclusion should really extend to all, including young women, indigenous people, internally displaced persons, the LGBTQIA community, and other religious minorities. Employing an intersectional, localized approach to implementation of the regional action plan will lead to more comprehensive efforts to improve all aspects of women, young women, and girls' lives in conflict-affected communities in Bangsamoro. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ania, for taking us from this trip, from the very abstract concept that we all agree to how to make that happen on the ground. Very clear example of how to be inclusive in this agenda, especially well, for people that are really dealing with the challenges of putting these action plans and conflict resolution in a good path. So now I will, before I turn to Anik, Lucia Rest, that will be introducing some questions from the audience, I would like all the panelists and experts to turn on the cameras if they can, and the rest to turn it off, because we're going to have a group picture. So a few seconds of posing and arranging whatever you need to arrange for a nice group picture.
So as traditionally, I will be counting down 3, 2, 1. And just because it's always difficult with Zoom, I will take the opportunity to count one more time. 3, 2, 1. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, Shadi, for guiding us. Now I would like to quickly turn to Anik. Can you help us to channel some of the interest and questions that the participants have for this session?
Terrific. Thanks so much, Martine, and thanks so much, speakers. Really, really great discussion. So I think we're only going to have about 5 minutes or so to address some really complex questions that you're all welcome to have a look at in the Q&A function below. Some have been answered, and you'll see there's an answered subfolder that you can also access to see some of the responses. But I've been able to group, I think, 2 themes for the questions that have been posed. And the first one is focused on women peace builders. One question, assuming this is potentially for Ms. Solomon, but a question on how do you think it's important for women mediator networks to connect more, to interact more with women's organizations and networks? There was a question on how do we further include the participation of rural women in peace building work. And there was a good question also on what's a specific example of some activities undertaken by women that are transformative when it comes to peace and security. So that's sort of the peace builder category of discussions, and I'll ask speakers to self-identify if they wish to answer any of those sub-questions. And then the second component, while this was targeting specific, targeting is the wrong word, forgive me, was addressing specific countries such as Switzerland, Canada, and the US, it speaks to some of the perceived incoherence of certain tools utilized by countries, such as sanctions or the purchase of military equipment, and how that may be incoherent with the women, peace, and security agenda. So perhaps just a question on how do we align the WPS agenda in the context of the utilization of these tools. So perhaps I'll turn it over now to any of our panelists from this section to see whether they wish to take any of these questions, reminding again our great panelists that we only have a very limited amount of time. I would also welcome previous panelists, if you wish to answer some of these within the Q&A function, by all means, please do include your response within the Q&A function. So do any panelists wish to take any of these questions? Perhaps I could look to Ms. Solomon.
Yeah, I'll be very brief, and thanks for the question in terms of the role of the networks and what they can do and whether they should engage, I believe was the question, with other with local women's organizations, of course. But I think it's important for the mediators networks to be clear about what their agenda is, which is, I suppose, to work towards including other networks and providing a space for women mediators, for other women's groups. I think it's very important in the peace building sphere and for the women, peace and security agenda to cross-pollinate. We're not just talking about mediators, we're not just talking about gender experts. We have to work towards integrating political issues, political analysis, and so that we're working at a number of different levels. And very quickly, I think the other issue is that the network should be working at ensuring that the peace process reflects women's groups on the ground at the level of track 1 and vice versa. That is our role. I'll leave it to others now because you don't have a lot of time.
Thank you. Do others want to jump in on this point or any other of the questions that have been raised? I cannot see all panelists, I'm afraid, so please do just jump in there and we'll try to manage that way.
Thank you. I will just jump in. This is something I've meant to say in mind, so I'm hoping it answers one of the questions. But the full implementation, so we do have international instruments that will ensure a voice and a place for people. And I'd like to draw your attention to UNDRIP, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. And so to have all countries have a full implementation plan that essentially restores the power and place of the original peoples of the land. And that is incredibly powerful. It is essential wherever you are around the world to have that voice of the original peoples of the land. And that in itself will have incredible positive impacts, not only the work within the countries, but internationally. You know, as I talked about with family group conferencing between the Indigenous people of Canada and the Maori of New Zealand, you know, with coming together and creating something that was having incredible impact. And so again, I want to really strongly encourage everyone to continue to advocate within your countries on the full implementation of UNDRIP. Miigwech.
Miigwech, Ms. Red Sky. Could I perhaps call on one more of our panelists to answer any of the questions that were raised, and then we'll have to throw it back to Martine. Okay, all right. Well, Martine, I think it's back to you and to the next portion of our program. Thanks very much, everyone. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Anik. And as usual, when discussions are interesting like this one, this shortest of time, and this is just a way to realize that we have to keep doing this. Hopefully next time in person. But thank you for to all of you, especially for you, Anik, to be doing this, presenting these questions. And now I would like to invite Harriet Williams-Bright to introduce this new and very exciting tool that we will have, the website of the Focal Point Network. Harriet, please entertain us.
Well, thank you very much, Martin, and thank you all. I hope this will be, you know, informative. This has been a process that has been in development for quite some time, and we're quite excited to now have a WPS Focal Points Network website. This website will go live tonight at midnight. And the address is www.wpsfocalpointsnetwork.org. So just to give you a brief, you know, look through of the website itself, this is the homepage of the website where you can learn more about the genesis of the Focal Points Network. You've been hearing a lot about what the Focal Point does, and now you can really go into detail on the background of the network itself. And here on the home page, it highlights the key objectives of the website. We also have the in focus part of it, which you know, spends a lot of time discussing what we are working on currently. Today's event is featured, as well as the Let's Talk Women, Peace and Security series. As you know, we just heard from Ambassador O'Neill earlier today. And then we will also be spotlighting important and new reports that come out. So here you'll see 4 main reports are highlighted. And this will be global reports, not necessarily linked to the network itself, but very much relevant to women, peace, and security. And who are the members of the WPS Focal Points Network? If you always wondered where that list was, here it is now. You can click on the members page, and it will take you to the members that are part of this network. As you can see, we have 89 current members of the network, and this includes member states and regional organizations. And each of these pages will be managed by the members themselves. At least the information that you see in these pages will reflect what members submit and want to share about their different WPS programs and initiatives. So let's see what that looks like if we go to Canada's page, for example. And here with Canada's page, it will show which year the country or member joined the network. It will also show the different national and action plans of that particular member. And the monitoring reports, gender equality policies or feminist foreign policies, and key WPS and gender equality reports and resources. There's also the official web page of that particular member if it exists, as well as an email if they do want to share that information publicly. And as you know, with the Focal Points Network, we have members who are both member states as well as regional organizations. So if we go and scroll down to the regional organizations and click on the African Union, for example, we can go to the African Union page. And also similar to Canada's page, you will see the relevant documents for that regional organization, monitoring reports, policies, and also key resources that would be relevant to you visiting that site. And then a little bit about the network itself. So you can go to the About page and learn about the background and objectives in more detail, the founding meeting of the network, the technical operative guidelines, how to become a member, and the governance page. And the governance page features the network chairs. Currently, Canada and Uruguay are co-chairs of the network. You've seen a lot of this friendship symbol. If you want to know more about it, you can visit this page and read the background behind it. It also features the future chairs who we'll hear from later today, South Africa and Switzerland, and also features the past chairs, Namibia, Germany, and Spain, who have been past chairs of this network. And of course, UN Women as the secretariat of the network is also featured on this page. So back to the homepage. Here you will have the events that the network usually hosts, and you will have access to the different summaries from all of the events. So here at the top of the page, we have our current event ongoing now, as well as the registration link. We'll have the summary posted here when that's ready. And then if you wanted to review past events, the virtual meetings, the summaries of those meetings, the capital and regional meetings that we have, the summaries of those meetings in the different languages, and then the United Nations General Assembly side events and the meetings we have in New York, those are all now easily accessible here, and you can go and read the recommendations from the network and what the network plans to do going forward. I also wanted to mention that at the very top of the page, you can click and change to the language you want to view the web page in. So that's possible to view the content in different languages. And then there's the resources page here. And the resources page focuses on resources for the entire WPS agenda. We have a global map of adopted national action plans. And here you'll see that we currently have 98 countries and territories that have adopted national action plans. That's 50% of UN member states. And this page focuses only on the most recent NAP of those countries. So what you'll see here are the most recent NAPs of the 98 countries. You could go and click on this drop-down menu and select a country that you want to see, for example, Afghanistan, and you'll be able to go there and get that particular national action plan for that country. And then we also have resources here because as many of you know, WILF has been really doing detailed analysis of national action plans. And if you want to really delve more deeply into the past generations of NAPs and the analysis that they have, that's accessible here. The London School of Economics is also doing very detailed work and analysis on national action plans, so you'll be able to find that information on this page. And this page also has information on WPS frameworks, regional action plans, reports, and multimedia resources that you will be able to use. And back to the homepage itself, we mentioned the current issues tab, which has some of the recent posts or interesting things that are happening in the WPS community. The most recent launch of the Compact on Women, Peace and Security and Humanitarian Action. The launch video is now available and you'll be able to access it here, but also from the Compact website. There's also a great paper on financing gender inclusive peace, which we've discussed quite a bit. There's the report of the civil society consultations that was led by WPS and Canada. And we had an event last year around this, so you can go and read that report in more detail. You've all heard from Tony Hastrup today. She has a great article out with Jamie Hagan on race justice and new possibilities. And that's also something you could access. So this page will be changing as we see more reports come out to be featured here. And then we're also excited about this community aspect of things, which will allow the members of the Focal Points Network to connect and discuss amongst each other and to exchange views directly and to share best practices. There's also a forum for members of the network if they wanted to lead on a particular topic and to run a discussion on that particular topic, that would be possible here. We also have a public forum, which will allow for these discussions. So for example, if we wanted to have a continued conversation on the event today, that could be featured on the public forum and anyone would be able to engage and interact. And then there's a calendar of events, which will be calendar of women, peace and security events. So if you have an event that you want the Focal Points, but other visitors to the site to know about, please send it through and we'll be able to feature it here. Currently, we have featured the Women, Peace and Security event that we're currently doing. And then last but not least, we have the contacts page here. So if you have any need to contact the Secretariat of the network, you can do so using this form and we'll be able to get back to you as soon as possible. So this is just a brief synopsis. At midnight tonight, the website will go live. We urge everyone to engage, to continue to visit the website. We'll be updating it quite frequently. And we are very excited to have this other avenue of engaging with everyone in this community. So thank you so very much. And over to you, Martin.
I'm speechless, Harriet. This is such an amazing tool, such an amazing resource. So much hard work behind this. I just think you deserve a round of applause. So I really appreciate
myself and a very dedicated secretariat team who are probably going through sleepless nights. So a big shout out to Vic and also to Shadi and Fafali. But thank you so much, Martin.
Exactly. I've been in touch with you and Shadi to congratulate you both, but I know that many more were behind this. So please express to them our appreciation, because this is definitely a great resource, a game changer for all the people engaged in the WPS Focal Point Network. Thank you very much. So we are approaching the end of the event, and as you have seen and listened, this event has had a strong forward-looking component. So what a better way to start closing this meeting with the reflections of our esteemed colleagues from South Africa and Switzerland, the future co-presidents of the Focal Point Network. So I would like to invite first the Focal Point for South Africa, Madame Charlotte Love. Charlotte is the Chief Director for Transformation Program and Organizational Development at the Department of International Relations and Cooperation of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of South Africa. So Charlotte, thank you very much for patiently waiting until now. Here, you have the floor now.
Thank you very much, Martin, and let me thank your team for a well thought out meeting of today, but also on behalf of South Africa and Switzerland to take this opportunity to congratulate the esteemed leadership of the Oriental Republic of Uruguay as well as Canada for excellently co-chairing the Global Focal Point Network on Women, Peace and Security. We thank you profusely for keeping the network dynamic and lively through innovation, and some of the ways of doing a business differently is what we experienced here today. We thank you because you took over at a time when the global community was faced with the worst crisis as a result of the outbreak of COVID-19. And you pioneered new ways of doing things and ensured business continuity beyond the imagination of all of us. We are excited to take the baton in later on this year. We are more than ready to assume leadership and contribute meaningfully in turning WPS commitments into concrete action. We'll use our core chairship to develop transformative, bold, concrete, and impactful programs that will promote the implementation of the WPS formative framework. But in the same breath, we will ensure that as we conclude our chairship, we are able to look back with pride and say to ourselves, indeed, Global South and Global North were able to join hands in creating something that can be a building block for the future of the WPS agenda. We are currently in a process of conceptualizing our core chairship strategic document that will be used as a base for our collective approach to our leadership of the network. Our initial discussions that started over a year ago will be completed soon, and we'll share our collective vision with the network. We have agreed already with Switzerland that we'll have 2 regional meetings during our tenure, one representing the Global South and the other one representing the Global North. Your very first question when we were starting this discussion really talks to this issue that is our concern as South Africa and Switzerland, the need for us to show unity of purpose as Global North and Global South, and hence we thought it would be important for us to have a meeting that will represent these 2 component of our international relations. I will speak to the first leg of our program, and Talia will speak to the second leg of our program. Our core chairship will kickstart with South Africa hosting a regional meeting in collaboration with the AU Office of the Special Envoy on Women, Peace and Security. Through this meeting, we'll mobilize other AU member states to be part of the global network, but above all, to implement the spirit and the letter of Resolution 1325. As we finalize our collective vision, we are also looking at ways of scaling up existing programs and initiating new ones. We take up this responsibility as South Africa, having adopted our National Action Plan, and our national plan has a hallmark program that focuses on women capacity building program on conflict resolution, mediation, and negotiation. This, of course, is supported by the government of Norway, and we've been working with them on this program for years now. We are hoping that through the partnership with Switzerland, we'll be able to take this work even to the greater strides and use our already established Gertrude Schoppe Women's Mediators Network. I am quite aware that as I'm addressing you, you are asking yourself of the situation in South Africa. Most of you from the network have sent me messages regarding the current situation in our country. We believe that we will use the mechanisms that exist in our National Action Plan to try and amplify voices of women who are currently at the crossroads of conflict that is taking place in our country. We'll also make sure that through these mechanisms, we caution women against being used as pocket knives or the cannon fodder by those who may want to destabilize our country. So as I come here as the focal point on women, peace and security, I want to assure you that the women mediators of South Africa are on the ground. trying to address this that you have seen on the media, the looting, vandalism, the lawlessness, with an idea of ensuring that we build lasting but quality peace. I raise this issue with you openly in this meeting because our role as mediators, as peace builders, is to ensure that even in times of difficulties, we're able to stand up and be counted and use mechanisms that has been established through 1325 to build back better. We assure you that as a country, we will continue to work with others in trying to resolve our current challenges. But above all, we want to use the opportunity of our chairship to also look at the youth peace journey. And the youth peace journey in our case will ensure that even these issues that I've just referred to are dealt with in the context of the youth peace and security agenda. Currently, we have started what you call the Youth Peace Pot, which says for the youth, by the youth, for the world, which is an idea of building peace, not only in our country, but beyond our borders. And would want to use some of these initiatives and our campaign hashtag Time for Peace Drive to quell the current situation, to de-escalate the crisis, but also to ensure that we're on a on a path to development peace, but also on a path to justice that ensures that all South Africans feel and are safe in their environments. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. I hope what I'm saying is well taken. I want to tell you that what you have just said, the intellectual honesty that you have expressed in your remarks is the best sample, the best example that this is a community of trusted participants, that we can speak the hard truths and listening to them. So thank you very much for setting the tone that is the tone of the Focal Point Network. Thank you very much. We are in great hands. And now I would like to invite the Focal Point of Switzerland, Talia Wall, who is the Senior Gender Advisor at the Federal Department of Foreign Affairs, Directorate of Political Affairs, Human Security Division, where she addressed peace, human rights, and humanitarian policy and migration. So Talia, I'm very happy to see you. Now you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Martin. It is a real pleasure for me to address the network and to provide an outlook for 2022. I'm joining Charlotte in her thanks to Uruguay and to Canada for your leadership of the network over these past 1.5 years. Throughout the pandemic, your flexibility ensured that the network was able to continue exchanging and learning as we did today during this important discussion. I would also like to thank our colleagues from the UN Women for your great support, also for us as members of the Troika. Switzerland is delighted to join forces with South Africa in co-chairing the Focal Points Network as of next year. And as highlighted by Charlotte, we have established an excellent cooperation and started to reflect on our priorities and activities and projects for 2022. And at this point, I would also like to express our solidarity with South Africa during these challenging times. On women, peace and security, we share the thinking that a transformative agenda needs to rely on innovative strategies to advance its implementation. The WPS agenda was groundbreaking in setting up the premise that gender equality and the inclusion of the needs and experiences of women in conflict prevention, conflict resolution, and in peace building is a necessity to build sustainable peace. At the same time, there is an increasing need for the WPS agenda to respond to new types of security threats, such as the current pandemic, violent extremism, or climate change. But also, as we heard today, the question is also how the agenda works in peaceful society and how we integrate intersectionality into the framework of the WPS agenda. The agenda needs to be fit for the challenges of our times. But how can the agenda respond to security threats and dynamic contexts when implementation is stalling or even regressing? I would like to highlight 2 points. First, the WPS agenda needs transformative action. And in continuity with the substantive work already done by previous chairs, the identification of tools and strategies that positively impact implementation will be at the forefront of our joint engagement next year. We will build on existing efforts on the multilateral level, such as the outcomes of the Generation Equality Forum and the Compact on Women, Peace and Security and Humanitarian Action. We also want to learn from the network members' experiences and knowledge. Switzerland will try and test peer review as an instrument for the evaluation of its National Action Plan on 1325. Second, together with South Africa, we are currently defining the priorities for our co-chairship. These include, for example, the full, equal and meaningful participation of women in peace processes as an issue where concrete action is still urgently needed. Switzerland is therefore investing in women mediators. Strengthening networks and capacity building are important aspects, as we also have heard today. Women mediator networks are a means for women to exchange among peers, learn from each other, and gain visibility in this competitive field. Switzerland has supported regional network efforts and also launched this year a network of Swiss women in peace processes. In terms of capacity building, Switzerland supports professional mediation trainings aimed at diplomats as well as civil society representatives at home and abroad. We also see the inclusion of civil society as a cross-cutting priority, whether domestically, where Swiss civil society is part of the development and implementation of our National Action Plan, or in our peace-building efforts in partner countries. Our long-standing engagement in the support of dialogue processes, including women and youth on the ground and civil society organizations, has taught us that a peace process is more than the official negotiation table. Women-led organizations and civil society must be able to participate meaningfully in conflict transformation processes for more equitable peace. This means that we must further our efforts in designing effective mechanisms that link official talks with informal peace initiatives. And I think someone mentioned already today the redesigning of peace tables at the Mentimeter beforehand. And lastly, the transfer of experiences by the civil society at the local level to the level of multilateral politics and back remains a challenge. There is still a need to strengthen the links between multilateral instruments and the WPS agenda. To conclude, we are looking forward to deepen our space for learning on these issues with the focal points in the 2 meetings planned next year in Pretoria and in Geneva. A transformative women, peace and security agenda needs transformative actions. We are looking forward to continuing this work with the Focal Points Network and in partnership with South Africa and the Troika members. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Talia. This has been a great way to close this event with the words of the future co-chair. We couldn't be in better hands. And honestly, this event today has provided a lot of substantive input to consider how to move forward in the next years of the WPS agenda. I wouldn't dare to summarize in a couple of minutes what has been transpired today, because it has been so much, so deep and wide at the same time, that we all have to think about, to assimilate, to digest many things. In my case, that I wasn't aware, angles that I didn't consider. Probably this happened to all of you. This is why we are doing this, to have this kind of interactions with the experts on the field, in the academia, in government. I like the word humility that was said from the beginning and throughout the event, to speaking and listening to truth, even if they can be hard ones, and to create trust. Without truth, we don't have the trust that is necessary to build the communities that we help to build at home and internationally. This is the only way to move things forward, is to build this sense of community by engaging with all the different stakeholders. And this is a great tool to do this. So thank you very much for staying until now. Before we transitioned, we passed the torch to South Africa and Switzerland. We will have a side event in the margins or in the framework of the UN General Assembly in September. So you will hear from us about that. And also at some point close to that day, we'll be sharing a summary outcome document of this 2020-2021 co-presidency, the different meetings that happened during this period. So to share, to capture discussions and key recommendations and best practices. So we'll be sharing this information very soon. Thank you very much for participating, and I would like to leave, but just because I have been working for the last month almost in a daily basis, but with a few of you from Global Affairs Canada and UN Women, I would like to highlight how amazing it is to work with all of you, with Sarah Rose Caldwell. Sarah, thank you very much for all your work. You could be doing this that I'm doing right now, but you are there in the background helping with everything and thinking so much. Thank you, Anik Lucia Ruiz, dear friend. It has been amazing to work with you since your first visit at the embassy before you went to Montevideo to meet your future partners. And of course, Hamima Fatah, Sarah Wasi as well, Harriet and Shadi. It's great to be working with you all. I'm missing a lot of people, but this has been the group that we interacted in a daily basis for the last month. So thank you very much to all of you. Win, good friend, thank you for opening this event and your leadership from Global Affairs Canada. It's amazing to work with you, and see you around next time. I'm really honored to have played this role. Thank you for your trust. Muchas gracias. A Noelia, amiga. Bye bye.